You're the ghost of Sparta. Everyone knows who you are. Everyone is afraid of you.
You cannot change. You will always be a monster.
Good afternoon and hello everyone else around the world. This is your weekly war brief coming from the PNW. Yeah, it's just going to be again me today, and this is a pre-recorded show, and we'll be doing next week the anniversary show for the war because as of this recording, yesterday was the third year of the war. Hopefully everyone went out and did a little activism with what was posted in a few chats there. Um, Yesterday was a worldwide effort for commemorating the war and Ukraine's 3 years of victory, essentially, still being in the fight. And what else? Yeah, it was good to see that happening around everywhere. Many major cities in Paris and Warsaw. There was particularly can't talk right now. Some very good turnouts. DC had a good rally, I think, over Friday, and yeah, so that was good to happen. What else we got going in the background? So the format for the show is going to be the usual. We're going to go over our map and then our usual brief over the fronts, headlines, and some other things. The show is going to be covering the last 2 weeks because last week we had a interview with a American volunteer who was over in Ukraine, and his name was Pavel of the Americana Network, and he hosts the Great American uh, History series. Let me just take a look at the show here again. I am butchering the hell out of it. Great Men of History, sorry, and the most recent one they have is of Jesse James, which was posted on the yesterday actually on the 24th. Please give it a good listen there. It's about 2 hours. It's a good show, and that was a particularly good episode. What else we got going on for us show wise? Again, we are on the Americana Network. Had an interesting reception in their public chat. Appreciate the engagement for everyone there, and for Gordon, who heads up the network, for giving us the opportunity. And we are also on Twitter now. Been on there for about a week. I post things once or twice a day, maybe every other day if I'm busy. Uh, kind of have it. We have an interesting network that's been built up over there. It's small, but it's growing, and just trying to put the word out. So if you guys have a Twitter account, go over to. Let me just gotta double check that too. Go over to just type in Warcast. I'm sure you'll find us on X or Twitter. I hate calling it X. And what else we got on social media wise? I think that's it. Nothing new with the show. We are currently curating. So again, back to the big show for next week. We are currently curating a lot of the combat footage for the last year. That's a lot of work, and we don't know how long the next show is going to be, but we'd like to keep it under 9 hours because last year was a monster of a show. Uh, so yeah, again, I'll put out as soon as that gets a bit closer and what the show's going to look like next week. I think we'll just press on here, guys. That is all I can really think of right now. But I'll put out the usual stuff. Our chat is over at t.me/Radio Ruin chat. The channel for the show is at t.me/the Warcast. And if you want to give me any donations or support our work, we currently have a donation box over at buymeacoffee.com/WCast. Let me check on the dashboard for that actually. Just want to double check and see if we get any new donations. Yeah, with all the platforms we have, also I should probably mention that. We are also up on Rumble, Entropy sometimes, D Live, and Kick when we are live. The brief is usually going to be on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey, along with the combat footage on Odyssey and Rumble. YouTube is a little too restrictive on the combat footage stuff. I just am not going to chance it after seeing how Funker 530 has had problems trying to keep their show, and like they have a reputation, so they can leverage that against YouTube and try not to get fired or have their channel shut down. Whereas with us, we're a smaller channel, not a whole lot of how to put it, cover or exposure, I guess is the right way to put it. And not to mention the politics on the show that we cover would probably get that channel shut down. So I try to keep it a little bit safer. I still age restrict the channel just to be safe and provide as much context for the combat footage I do show in the brief for that. All right, I think that covers all the bases here, guys. And if you have any questions, come on when we have a live show. This last week, there was a lot going on, aside from some activism, obviously. This week, uh, next week we'll try to get back onto the normal rotation of things. Just a lot of moving parts. So I can only give my time so much, and I can give enough time for the brief, but not for a live show on Monday. All right, let's get into it here, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just bring it up on my end here. Okay, and get over to OBS, and I'll get the PowerPoint started. I think I'm going to up my level here a little bit so you can hear me a little bit, and I don't have to yell into the mic as much. And the brief. Okay, that should. Nope, that is something else. Let me just open up the studio window here and get a preview of it. Nope, okay. PowerPoint. Anyway, here we go. Okay, I'll do the transition here and we will start the brief. Okay, as I said earlier, we're covering from the 11th of February to the 23rd of February 2025. All right. So on the curse front, guys. Oh yeah, you know what? Let's. Sorry. Let me pause this real quick. Let's go over the actual map before I go over those maps and kind of go over what's been happening. There's not been a whole lot of movement on the fronts here. I'm just bringing it up on my end here. So we're going to start in Kursk and move our way around as usual. So the Ukrainians had a successful attack into this pocket right here near Cherkasky Konopelka. I do believe the eventual goal was to probably get to Yolanok or Zhiri right here to get to, or Belista. Anyway, to get to this ground line communication because that would allow them to expand their footprint to the east, and by controlling that ground line communication, control a lot of the rest of the area here. They'll also shore up their right flank here if they manage to get that far, but they only got out to a little more east of Suja. On the other side, the Russians are trying to push from the west of the pocket. Ukrainians have made some moderate gains back out of Malaya Lochnia after they swapped territory with the Russians when the Russians pushed them out of Nova Ivanovka to this road right here. It's going back and forth though, but it looks like the Ukrainians are making some decent headway. Where is Pug? Yeah, they're still in Pogrepki, which is good to see, and the rest of it north here is contested according to this map. There was another announcement by the Ukrainians that they made a little headway into Uspinovka, but that's right on the border there, and kind of interesting how these villages are laid out here. I mean, this is the international border right here, but between Veselivka and this right here, it's really just someone's backyard right here. So it looks like the Ukrainians took a small village of probably a few buildings. Yeah, I mean, that's if you can call it anything. Anyway, but that's what's going on in Kursk there. Let's go over toward Kharkiv, Luhansk. So yeah, let's see here. So that's in Kovka. Interesting. It's Petropavlivka. Sinki. Okay, yeah. So this is Kupiansk right here. The Russians have been expanding their foothold a little bit on the west side of the Oskil River here, and it doesn't seem that they've still are able to claim all of Delvrichna, which would be the major city for them to move across. Based off the reporting I'm seeing, the Ukrainians still hold the outskirts of this village, and the rest of it is contested. Um, but I would like to see the Ukrainians push them off this shoreline here, obviously. But it is a concern. The rationalism for it is that supposedly the Russians would probably like to get across this river and also restart their attacks near Vovchansk, and then pinch off this part of Kharkiv Oblast right here, which would increase their marginal negotiating position, I guess. But yeah, nothing has really been happening in Vovchansk. If anything, the Ukrainians have been taking more territory. It looks like the aggregate plant is under Ukrainian control for the most part, and then you have contested territory 3-4 blocks deep. The Russians control the north half of the town, but back in the day, the Ukrainians were pushed back along the river right here, but it looks like they're slowly but surely over the months pushing them back north. But this city, again, guys, is wiped off the map. There is nothing really standing left to call a building in that town. But yeah, Hilboke, Ukrainians did make some advancements along these forest lines here, but that's about it. Toward Lipsy, and then we'll go back toward. Yeah, that's about it there. Russians are still trying to do something with this salient near Kurlikivka. Nothing really worth mentioning. A lot of these attacks are done by infantry waves. The Russians along most fronts have not been using a lot of mechanized forces, which is interesting. It's been an ongoing trend as we talked about, but that's what's been lacking in the Russian attacks is any mechanized fist. Russians are still on the other side of the reservoir here near the Kurakove reservoir or river here, and they're trying to push toward Kolodiazi from Ivanivka slowly, but they have expanded this bridgehead over these crossings right here. What else? This map is showing the Russians contesting Belhorivka. I've seen this 100 times, it feels like. So I'm taking this with a grain of salt. The Ukrainians have been holding Belhorivka for quite some time. But we'll see if that gets updated here. This map is still showing this entire area contested for the Russians around Seversk. The Russians have made a lot of attacks over Seversk. It seems about every month and a half to 2 months that Russians try to make some sort of break out of this area from Spirne and Topolivka. Last time was in December, January-ish. There was, 3 battalions that got destroyed, and then the commander and deputy commander of the brigade, Russian brigade, or regiment, whatever it was, operating this area got fired for false reporting of their progress. So, again, I'm always in the wait and see attitude of these things just because we never really know based off geolocated footage, but then I hear other things about geolocated footage that aren't updated on some maps, but we work with what are the best resources. The reason, again, why, guys, I'm not using IceW as much anymore is that even by their own admission, they're having to update their maps and review their methodology and some of the reporting. Now, that was in one of the other updates from the last 2 weeks. So they're going to do a little, they are going to do a little house cleaning, I guess. I don't know. So they're going to review that and try to update their maps a little bit. It sounds like in the near future. Chesiv Yar still pretty much the same. There are reports that the Russians are trying. So this is the Seversky Donets, sorry, the canal, separating the west side of Chesiv Yar here from Kalinivka and Bakhmut and Ivanevsky here. Anyway, so the canal sounds like the Russians are trying to expand egress points across it so they can bring in mechanized forces. But again, the Ukrainians have still been holding fairly well here. There's still a lot of urban area for the Russians to have to try to push through. What else has been going on? So the takeaway from the Luhansk Kharkiv sector here, guys, is that they're trying to expand the bridgehead around Kupiansk. They want to try to seize this potential salient for them. It's based on their progress. That's a very ambitious undertaking. Trying to expand this bridgehead moderately. They're trying to push up to the Oskil River here. Unlikely to happen. And they're trying to move out into the Seversk area, try to get to Seversk itself, but then also try to break out of Chesiv Yar, Toretsk, and we'll get to Pokrovsk in a minute. But what this all culminates to, though, is that the Russians, based off a few different military observers' ideas, is that the Russians are trying to move into the fortress city belt here. The cities of Slovyansk, uh, Konstantinivka. I'm trying to remember the other ones here. Yeah, anyway, so there's these four cities here, and they want to basically get this ground line communication from Sloviansk down to Konstantinivka to break the back of the Ukrainian resistance in the Donbass. Um, Based off what we've been seeing from the movement of units from the south part of the theater here, south of Orkiv, over toward Toretsk, this is what's been reported, is that the Russians are moving these units not to Pokrovsk, but over to this area now. So it sounds like the Russians are, how to put it, reprioritizing their attacks to get in between Slovyansk and Kramatorsk and Konstantinivka and Druzhkivka, sorry. Um, Again, like they from Bakhmut to Chasiv Yar, that's been 2 years. They're still in Chasiv Yar. And there's and this kind of segues us into Toretsk here. There are still Ukrainian units operating in Toretsk, however you want to enunciate it here. Based off these lines of attacks, looks like the Ukrainians are attacking. But based off this footage right here, it seems like a Russian FPV drone hit a Ukrainian vehicle. Again, it's really bad footage sometimes, and it's interesting because like what we've been seeing earlier here is that they've been holding on the outskirts of the town, or mainly also using these trash piles for observation, forward observation, and using drones to constrict and slow down Russian movements. We'll see what happens though. It would be interesting to see if this sort of Ukrainian spike attack works. And what we could see here, if these lines are holding true, Ukrainians wanted to move down this ground line communication and probably move into what would be these high-rise buildings right here. You know, again, this is what the Russians were doing. Take over the center of the city and then expand from there. But this map shows that there are Ukrainians in the middle of the city, which is interesting. So there's a Ukrainian assault here, and interesting. So again, this is all contested, but we're seeing confirmed footage of Ukrainians in the middle of Toretsk. That's interesting. Let me rewind the footage here a little bit. So this is going back to the 17th, 18th. Interesting. So you kind of see the progress here of the Ukrainians, and then they flipped it back to yellow. Interesting. Again, this is all fog of war, guys, so it's quite possible that the Ukrainians have this part of Toretsk, and then they're pushing in here hard. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing so many reports of Russians having problems in their army, but this is manifest of how bad it is for them, especially in an urban setting. Anyway, we'll keep an eye on that. We'll probably have better reports on it over the next week. Yeah, so that's potentially good news. We'll see. Um, Not much going on out of what would you even call this sector here. This is to the east of Mirnarod and Pokrovsk. Russians are just taking ground for the sake of it. They're trying to get to this ground line communication, but it looks like the Ukrainians are holding it fairly well. All right, let's get over to the Pokrovsk sector. So this is what everyone's been focused on for like basically the last year. Ukrainians have been counterattacking, which is really interesting. So they took Lysivka, Dachensky, and Pischane. There was some back and forth with the Russians in Pischane, but it's been confirmed that the Ukrainians do control Pischane, and they've actually been pushing out west from there. There was reports of unmanned ground vehicles, or UGVs, with machine guns from the unit here pushing out towards Volkove. Um, I still find it interesting that this particular map shows Koltene held by the Russians. I guess they're waiting on confirmation of Ukrainians being here. Again, you don't really flip the color around unless you see Ukrainians there. But yeah, so I would again, we're seeing Ukrainian drone attacks in this area here. So maybe the Russians did take the southern part of that area again, but I would probably mark that as contested because we've seen the Ukrainians come back and forth on this area. And the Russians still have not taken Udachne. They're still held up in Koltene, and that's really where they've been in the last month. Major reports of massive casualties on the Russian side. We'll get into that into the headlines section of all this. And the Ukrainians have moved into Uspanivka a little bit more. So we're seeing them, like I was talking about earlier, it would be great if the Ukrainians can pinch getting into Novovasilivka and pushing from Piszczany to Volkove. By doing that, there would be no ground communication for the Russians to get up here, and this would collapse this entire salient. The Russians would have to move back to Novotoretsky and Novopusnika here. That would push them safely away from Pokrovsk. There was a thing by, who was it? Strelkov? I think it was somebody else. It was another mill blogger talking about Ukrainians possibly attempting to collapse this pocket, but based off these small counterattacks, it's nothing operational but tactical, I would say. If they were going to try an operational collapse of it, they'd probably have to move into Selidove again right here, because that is really the major node where the Russians are moving in and out of this area. Um, yeah, moving south of Pokrovsk here. Still fighting in Andriivka, Konstantinopel. Russians are still fighting there. Over the week, the Ukrainians fell back, for the last 2 weeks, the Ukrainians fell back from Dachne, which was good. I mean, that salient has been held on for quite some time. So this is back to the 14th, the 13th. So over time, let's see here what we got here. Got some surrenders, Russian. Okay, so that was just them hoisting their flag in Dachne there. Um, but yeah, that's about as most the progress as we can see from the Russians over the last 2 weeks was this small progress by them, but that is about 6 kilometers they've made in this one particular area from Ulake and Dachne. But yeah, now they're ensconced in Opel and still held up in Andriivka. Some more reports of them trying to actually move out of Velko Novosilica, but again, this is working out of an old pocket that they took a little bit ago. Maybe made 5 kilometers, maybe 6 in some areas. Not a whole lot of progress for the Russians there. And Zaporizhia and Kherson have been pretty quiet. Russian assault on some islands there, as you can see. MTLB last again. You're dealing with potato footage, the fog there, and some shelling by the Russians on Kherson, or southwest of Kherson there, and the little village right here, Dniprovsky. Anyway, that does it for the maps here, guys. Let me get back to the brief. Move that over. And let me find my PowerPoint here. It's Telegram. There we go. Okay, let me get a swig of water here real quick. Okay. Um, Okay. So over in Kursk, guys, developments of note in this last area, it's been semi-active. Zelensky stated on the 7th that Ukraine's incursion has forced the Russian military to redeploy forces from southern Ukraine to Kursk, preventing attacks in the direction of Zaporizhia. Kursk prevented forces from launching also new attacks in Sumy and Kharkiv oblasts, and the Russian forces have been trying to conduct raids along the international border. There was some recon sabotage groups over the last couple of weeks. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that they were repulsed. I haven't seen any general combat footage coming out of those engagements, so I wouldn't consider the Russians to be holding any territory in their raids into Ukraine. Uh, Ukrainian platoon commander operating Kursk said that Norco, North Korean troops, this is my slang for them, recently began attacking groups of 15 to 20 personnel instead of their larger 50 personnel, which would be close to 2 platoons or almost company-sized element, but continue to suffer significant losses. Ukrainian forces destroyed roughly a company's worth of North Korean forces in recent Russian-North Korean assaults in Kursk Oblast. Some combat footage for that, but I couldn't find it. What else we got here? Kursk authorities are investigating a local Telegram channel that criticized Russia's inadequate response to Ukraine's incursion into Kursk. Russian opposition outlet Sota reported on the 15th that the acting governor of Kursk ordered an investigation into the Sudza Rodnaya Telegram channel following claims that the local council overseeing refugee issues that channel is spreading fake news and that the situation with refugees about the situation with refugees in Kursk. The Sudzha Ronaya channel previously criticized the Kursk authorities for issues with civilian evacuations in August, and Roman Alikin, a Russian middle blocker and advisor to the Kursk governor, claimed that the Telegram channel does not post false information, and that accusations against the channel will only increase negativity among refugees and Kursk residents towards the federal government. Pardon me. All right, so let's move on to the next thing here. I do have some video footage for you guys here about a Russian mechanized assault that was destroyed. But before that, we got a deputy commander of Ukraine battalion in Kursk reporting that Russian forces recently resumed using armored vehicles during assaults and unsuccessfully attacked an area with roughly 7 armored vehicles on the 16th. The deputy commander stated that North Korean soldiers recently resumed assaults of 10 to 15 personnel, and that the groups are attacking in more spread out formations as part of an effort to complicate Ukrainian efforts to strike their forces. And North Korean forces recently withdrew from active combat operations after suffering heavy casualties, but they've adjusted their tactics to counter Ukrainian drone activities. So it seems like they're rotating what would seemingly be battalion-sized groups, I think, because they moved in with 10 to 12,000. They've suffered close to 4,000 casualties. So again, they're probably rotating in their battalions every once in a while. And once they reach a certain casualty point, they'll rotate them out. But we're also seeing another report that they might get reinforcements in March or April. Putin claimed on the 19th that elements of the 810th Russian Naval Infantry Brigade crossed the Kursk Oblast Ukraine international border. Ukrainian officials denied this claim and reported that Ukrainian forces repelled the recon sabotage group, like I talked about earlier. And a commander of Ukraine platoon operating Kursk stated on the 20th that Russian forces are using significantly fewer vehicles, so it went up on the 16th and then went down again, and conducting infantry assaults comprised of lower quality personnel and wounded service members. We're seeing pretty consistently in reporting from Ukraine and some of the videos we're seeing from the Russian side. All right, so we got a video here from Kursk here. This was posted on the 12th, showing a brigade repelling a platoon-sized Russian mechanized assault in an unspecified sector of Kursk. Hold on, guys. What was that? Sorry, that was a music thing I have somewhere connected. Okay. Anyway, so we'll just press on here. Okay, so going over to the Kharkiv front here, guys. Not much new, just a few things. Spokesman of the Ukraine Brigade operating the Kharkiv direction reported on the 11th that Ukrainian forces are slowly advancing near Lipsy, which we showed in this area right here. We showed the advancement, and this little leg right here is what they're taking, and also this small leg right here. And Ukrainian drone operators are destroying Russian positions and logistics to compensate for Russian artillery advantages in the area. It's interesting because I thought I heard something about them having an artillery parity there, but okay. A spokesman for Ukraine brigade operating in the same area stated the intensity of the fighting near Lipsy has decreased and due to poor weather. Spokesman for Ukraine brigade in Kharkiv also said that Russian forces are occasionally attacking in fire teams of 2 to 3 people, and Russian forces are mostly moving in golf carts, small armored vehicles, and civilian cars. And a spokesman stated also that the Russian forces very rarely use medium armored vehicles to transport infantry. This would be like BMPs and BTRs. Another officer of Ukraine brigade stated in Vovchansk that Russian forces have increased the intensity of ground attacks in Vovchansk during cold weather as part of efforts to advance to the southern bank of the Vovcha River. And last thing is that in the Volga direction, was a Ukrainian Air Force published that Ukrainian forces have recently repelled a Russian mechanized attack, destroying 30 personnel and an unspecified number of vehicles in Vovchansk. Okay. Luhansk direction here, guys. We kind of went over that in the map a little bit. Deputy Commander, Ukrainian Brigade, stated in the Borova direction that 90% of Russian personnel suffered. On the 10th, that up to 90% of Russian personnel suffered casualties during recent assaults near Kurlikivka and Kolsanivka, which is both northeast of Borova, which I think is in this area right here. And a source affiliated with the Ukrainian military intelligence is probably Front Intelligence on Telegram on Twitter. On the 14th, that Russian forces operating the Kupiansk direction have a quantitative advantage in drones over Ukrainian forces in the area. Spokesman Ukraine Brigade operating in Kharkiv stated that Russian forces are using more vehicles and armored vehicles to support offensive operations, but noted that Ukrainian forces are destroying many of them. The spokesman for the stated that Russian forces are also operating between 200 to 300 drones per day in that AO. But the Ukrainian electronic warfare systems are complicating our Russian drone operations. And Ukraine Brigade in the Kupiansk direction up here stated that Russian forces are attacking in groups ranging from 2 to 30 personnel in size, so fire teams to platoon size. And Russian forces first deploy less well-trained infantry to detect Ukrainian fire positions, then conduct strikes on Ukrainian positions, and then deploy better trained infantry to attack the Ukrainian flanks. It's kind of their typical order of operations, it sounds like. Okay, so we do have an interesting video from the Luhansk sector. So this is interesting because we keep hearing reports of the Russians in Kursk, particularly with their ground forces attacking, right? But it sounds like the Russians are moving in the North Koreans are using North Korean artillery in Luhansk, though. Proof of this is that the Ukrainians destroyed an M1978 Koksan self-propelled artillery system, which is a 170 millimeter, which is like a very unique North Korean caliber. But anyway, so this is posted from a Ukrainian regiment, on the 18th that stated that it destroyed this self-propelled artillery system in an unspecified sector of Luhansk Oblast. So what it's showing here is the type of barrel it has, and then this giveaway of its front part of the tank here. Kind of make it out here a little bit in the thermal image. See, it's highlighted there and right here. Okay, over towards Donetsk, guys. Spokesman for another Ukraine brigade in the Chasiv Yar sector stated that Russian forces are using armored vehicles to transport infantry to basements in Chasiv Yar, and the Russian soldiers in the area are either volunteers or convict recruits. Russian forces are simultaneously operating in many small infantry groups in the Chasiv Yar sector. We also have Ukrainian forces saying that, Ukrainian and Russian sources report that Ukrainian forces cleared the industrial zone of Vodny Druhi and pushed the Russian forces out of Dachensky, which is, again, near Pokrovsk. What else we got? Ukrainian forces recently advanced to southwestern Pischane and likely seized most of the settlement. This was reported on the 10th. Russian-built blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces are using unmanned ground vehicles with remote controlled machine guns near Pischani and Zerove. And what else we got? Another spokesman for the combat group of Ukraine forces in that sector stated that Russian forces in Pokrov's direction are losing momentum and becoming exhausted. Part of his statement includes Russian forces are losing an unspecified record number of armored vehicles and have suffered 14,000 to 15,000 casualties in the past month in the area, with 7,000 KIA. So it would be February alone in this particular sector. Yeah. Ukrainian MOD reported on the 3rd that Russian forces suffered 48,240 casualties in January 2025. Sorry, and Zelensky stated on the 4th that Russian forces suffer a 2-to-1 wounded to kill ratio along the entire front. That used to be closer to 3-to-4. Sorry, 3-to-1 or 4-to-1. Um, could be because of poor training. We usually hear a lot of reports of training only being about 2 weeks, if that, and maybe a lack of supply and just the winter weather. It would probably be exceptionally difficult for Russians to medevac their wounded to the rear, and that's why they probably atrophy so badly in the front if they get wounded in the middle of a winter. So that would be some of the factors I would think why we're seeing that particular number drop down to a 2-to-1, which would be, goodness, roughly World War One tier casualty, wounded to kill ratios. Anyway, best figures I still understand it. It hasn't been updated in a while, but supposedly Ukrainians had a 7-to-1 wounded to kill ratio on their side because of their typically better training and medical supplies. Because as we cover on the show, Russian tourniquets are garbage, and the CAT system that the Ukrainians use is a Western tourniquet, which is much better. These figures suggest that Russian forces suffered roughly 21,000 casualties, or roughly 43% of the total casualties in January 2025 near Pokrovsk. So little under half of Russian casualties are just in this one particular sector alone, which would bear out because we don't see a whole lot of action outside of Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, Pokrovsk. Some action, obviously, in Luhansk, mainly near Kopyansk. And then Kursk. All right, we'll go on the next slide here. Developments to note: Zelensky stated during the Munich Security Conference, that was a fucking shit show, that the situation in Pokrov's direction has improved in recent days, but did not provide further details. Spokesman for Ukraine Brigade in Pokrov stated that Russian forces and activity in this direction has become less intense in recent days, but noted that Pokrovsk remains one of the most active areas on the front line. Another Ukraine brigade in Chasiv Yar reported that Russian forces are taking advantage of the low visibility fog, which has been a common theme because of the canal, to reinforce the front line, and that Russian reinforcements in the area have little to no combat experience. Spokesman for Ukraine Brigade in the Lyman direction stated on the 16th that Russian forces continue to deploy small groups of 2 to 4 soldiers without armored vehicle support, but with FPV drone support to attack the area. It was also stated by the Ukrainian spokesman that Russian forces were pushed out of Pischane in part due to effective interaction between Ukrainian drone and ground assault elements. I wish I had. Well, no, I think we. No, it was. I'm trying to remember. We saw a particular. Oh, sorry, that was near Koltne, I think. In this area, it was near Udachne and Koltne right there. That was the assault we saw probably close to a month ago. I don't think we saw the assault on Pischane. Ukrainian military observer Yuri Budasov stated that Ukrainian forces pushed out elements of the Russian 74th Motorized Rifle Brigade out of Pischane in early February. Russian bloggers claim that Russian forces occupy all or most of the industrial zone in Pischane, and the Ukrainian forces currently only occupy a small part of the residential sector. I mean, it's not like Pischane is particularly big. I'm sorry, guys, because my autism gets activated. I'm going to bring up the map again just to kind of go over it with you a little bit here. Let me just find it again here. So this is again Russian reporting is just kind of laughable. We're looking at here, so I'm guessing this is the industrial sector they're talking about. But then you have all this is the residential area. I mean, you might be looking at what could be a I'm trying to guess here. Really, I can't. Really, I'm not the best map. There are people that do this sort of intelligence work that look from satellite footage. You know, you might be looking at a mine of some sort. Could be a concrete factory. You know, it's just anything. I don't know. It could be a coal factory for all I know. But anyway, there's nothing marking this here. But anyway, so that's what they're saying. But you're looking at a couple, one, two, three, four streets maybe. Anyway, it's not a big settlement, but anything that pushes out further from Pokrovsk is a win for Ukraine. So that's a good thing for them, though. I'd love to see them take Shevchenko, though. It might be their next target. But anyway, let me get back to the brief here and start back from where we were at. Okay, here we go. Da, 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 da. Yeah, Russian blogger, former Storm Z instructor, claimed that Russian forces in the Pokrovsk direction have insufficient quantity of small transport vehicles, and Ukrainian drone and artillery strikes are complicating Russian logistics and preventing Russian advances. This is a particular thing we've seen repeated a few times when the Russians push forward to a salient like this. Um, their ground communications are really choked, and Ukrainians can put on artillery from three different directions, and not mention the depth of their drone coverage is particularly effective if they have the Russians covered on three sides. So sometimes it seems like that's the way the Ukrainians want the Russians to push, kind of just channel them into a small funnel like that and just attrit them basically over a course of a few months, it seems like, especially in this sector right here. Russians haven't made a whole lot of progress at all on this rest of this front right here because they came up against Ukrainian trenches there. And the Ukrainians, as you can see here and here, and then this is the Pischani sector of them counterattacking. So kind of effective. The Russians aren't doing too well there for the now. The Mill blogger complained that Russian military command has not created separate strike drone brigades to support Russian efforts to break through the Ukrainian defenses, as Russian artillery is insufficient, which is interesting, and Russian forces are not able to sufficiently concentrate airstrikes against a single front line area to facilitate advances. Another spokesman of Ukrainian brigade operating Chasiv Yar reported on the 18th that Russians are attempting to create passages of the Seversky Donbass Canal, so Russian equipment can leverage. That Russian forces are trying to leverage rainy or foggy conditions when Ukrainian drone usage is limited in order to advance. Okay, so this is a little bit of footage from the Donetsk sector, guys. This is Russian Strela 10 short-range air defense system being destroyed near Velko Novosilka. That's a little bit Amy, obviously. Oh, Valentine's Day, of course. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, kind of cringy, I'll be honest, but the destruction of a Russian air defense system is always good, though. Okay. Anyway, we'll power on through that. So in Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, the Ukrainian military intelligence director reported on the 13th that Russian forces are disrupting a scheduled rotation of the International Atomic Energy Agency as experts to the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant on the 12th. There was some interesting footage I saw of this, though. There was I think it was after this was stated by the GUR. The Russians were moving in with the team, and there was some drones striking around the convoy. Yeah, I would probably suppose they didn't seem particularly well marked. I wish I could. I need to find that video again. I'll see if I could find it during the break here because we do have an intermission for the show. But if I don't, they were in white vehicles, if I remember right. But I don't think they had any marks on them. It might have had because I remember them having Russian flags. They might have had a UN flag somewhere in that, but most of these drone cameras are thermal or black and white. It seems like, or like 240p. So who knows? But yeah, I mean that's not really good for Ukraine to show, but or at least do. But that's it wouldn't be happening if the Russians weren't there to begin with. Russian MOD claimed on the 13th that Ukrainian forces conducted artillery and drone strikes on a convoy of IAEA experts on the 12th, like I talked about. Yeah, and there's supposedly insufficient quantities of boats for the Russians in the Dnipro direction, since they're using Soviet-era fishing boats to deliver cargo and personnel to frontline positions on the islands. Okay, moving over to the headlines here, guys. Let me check our time here. We'll go through the headlines, and I'll take a break after that, and I'll try to find that footage for you guys for the drone footage here. Okay, so we got a particularly in-depth section here for the missiles in the headline section because we have to cover the strike on Chernobyl that the Russians launched a Shahed drone and some updates on the Ukrainian production of drones too. Okay, so big news we weren't able to cover unfortunately last week and the week before I think. No, this was 10 days ago, so kind of in between. Was the Russian drone strike on Chernobyl and reactor number five's cover. Unfortunately, the damage is, how to put it, there is a marginal amount of damage that is permanent. It hasn't rendered the whole building useless, but has irreparably caused its efficacy to go down. I guess the way to put it. A New York Times reports on the a New York Times report indicates that Russian drone strike against the protective structure of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, or NPP, will likely have lasting impacts on the structure's effectiveness. The New York Times, citing analysis from UK consulting company, reported that Shahed drones reported that the Shahed drones was only anyway use a guidance system with preset coordinates of its target, and that this would indicate almost certain deliberate targeting of the Chernobyl NPP by Russian forces. We do have a couple pieces of evidence that it was a Russian drone. We'll get to that in the next slide. So they had to program it to send the drone there. So they're kind of setting up the facts of the case that this was a deliberate attempt of what you could basically say nuclear sabotage by the Russians. New York Times reported that the hole in the structure over reactor number 4 is about 504 square feet. The Ukrainian state emergency head, Andrei Danik, told the New York Times that the hole will take months to repair and that it is unclear what Ukraine needs to do to repair the damage. Chernobyl NPP's chief engineer, Alexander Tyarchuk, told the New York Times that Ukrainian engineers will temporarily seal the opening to prevent corrosion, but that the seal will not be radiation proof. Yeah. The Ukrainian Exclusion Zone Management Agency. If you're playing Stalker, this is probably the guys you have to refer to as. I forgot. It's been a minute since I was in that game, but anyway, reported that the Ukrainian emergency services are still working to put out the last of the smoldering fires in the Chernobyl NPP's protective structure on the 15th. The IAEA, or International Atomic Energy Agency, reported on the 15th that Ukrainian authorities are still working to extinguish fires from the February 14th strike on that area, and that the Russian strike breached the outer and inner cladding of the new safe confinement, or this big silver structure, and then damaged equipment and electrical cables. So this is a video of them putting that cover over the shielding here. Basically, I'll show it here. It doesn't have any audio, unfortunately. Again, this new covering isn't going to be radiation proof, unfortunately. This whole structure cost several $billions actually to put up, and the Russians went and hit it with a drone. Anyway, next slide here shows a couple things. So I'll just go through the pictures here real quick, and I'll show you the actual hit by the drone here. This is just from an outside camera looking towards reactor number 4's cover right here. You'll see an explosion on the cover there. Again, no audio. Yeah, and Shahed drones have, I want to say, a 50-kilogram warhead, something like that, maybe 50, 60. Not small. It's not small. We've seen Shahed drones get shot down by Ukrainian Mi-8 helicopters. When they nosedive and hit the ground, it's a fairly large explosion. A couple pieces of evidence. This is an engine from the drone that was inside the shielding, and then this is the serial number of the warhead. Is it warhead? It's in here somewhere. But yeah, these are Russian serial numbers basically. So the drone, the footage, the serial number. So there's some pieces of evidence there for you there. Just in case someone wanted to like push back. Oh, this is Ukrainians hitting the Chernobyl power plant. Like, okay, sure, you know. Anyway, it's another case of what we saw with the Kurakove Dam. No, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's over northeast of Kherson. Let me just check it again here on my map here. One sec, guys. I need to get this right. The Novakakovka Dam. Sorry, yeah. That was northeast. Yeah, no, the Novakakovka Dam. I was 2023 when the Ukrainians were counterattacking and the Russians blew the dam. The reason why I'm confident to say that's because the only access into the interior of the dam was on the Russian side, and that dam was built to withstand nuclear bombs. So you could only destroy the dam by blowing it up internally. But anyway, so this is another case of the Russians destroying what would be critical infrastructure that not only damages the civilian sector in Ukraine, but also has an immediate impact on everyone else around the conflict. In particular, because as I understand it, the winds blow west to east in Ukraine. The Russians doing this on the Chernobyl power plant um, would radiate Belarus and also Russia. So, yeah, kind of odd, but anyway. Russian forces continue to test new strike packages. Yeah, so we're moving away from Chernobyl, and this data is kind of more about the general uh, war of drones here over in Ukraine. Russian forces continue to test new strike packages and a series of drone and strikes targeting energy infrastructure in Ukraine on the night of the 10th to the 11th. They used an array of drones and Iskander missiles and Kinzhal missiles. The difference in this is that the Russian forces notably launched all the missiles at the strike package at a single target. We're used to seeing them kind of just saturate the how to put it. The target packages are meant to saturate the target area with different vectors of attack, and hopefully by sheer chance hit a target, whether it's a thermal power plant or anything else like that. But all these missiles hit one target. What that means to me is that there are so few targets left, maybe to put it that way, that the Russians have the luxury of sending all these missiles into one area or one target to basically sweep up what's left of the Ukrainian energy grid in the winter. Ukrainian Energy Minister Herman Halushenko stated the strikes forced Ukrainian energy operators to restrict electricity, and Ukrainian aviation expert Anatoly Korepchinitsky stated that Russian forces first launched the He drones, then launched the cruise and ballistic missiles, including Caliber cruise missiles, at a single target in order to complicate Ukrainian air defense systems. These missiles include KH-101 and KH-555 missiles, which were launched by Tupolev-22 and Tupolev-160, are backfire and blackjack strategic aircraft. The Russians are increasingly using KH-59 and KH-69 cruise missiles from tactical Sukhoi aircraft, typically Sukhoi 34s and 35s. What else? The Russians presumably prefer not to risk their strategic bombers in such strikes, and also stated that Russian forces are adapting their strikes following the provision of F-16 fighter aircraft to Ukraine, and are prioritizing striking frontline and border areas where Ukrainian forces are less likely to operate F-16s. This is just the fate of the war. It's just like both countries' air coverage and anti-air systems are so effective that the air forces have been a sideshow. It's still, but of all things, the Ukrainian Air Force is still in the fight. The Russian MOD stated recently that the Ukrainian Air Force was reduced to 20-something aircraft, but after 3 years, they've stated that they destroyed so many aircraft, it was like 3 times over the original inventory. Anyway, it was just kind of funny. What was the other thing I read? Something else I popped in my head about this though, but I forgot. Anyway, we'll press on here. So Russian production of drones is actually going down. Russia's Shahed drone production rate may be declining. Head of Ukraine's Center for Combating Disinformation, Lieutenant Andrei Kovalenko, reported on the 12th that Russia's Shahed drone production facility in Alabuga, Special Economic Zone, and that is a real thing, Alabuga, in the Republic of Tatarstan produced over 6,000 drones and thousands of decoy drones in 2024. ISW previously reported that the production facility has produced 5,760 Sahid drones between January and September 2024, and that Kovalenko's report suggests that the facility failed to produce many more drones from October 2024 to December 2024. The facility may be struggling to source enough materials to maintain high Sahid production rates, as Russia still relies on Iran to provide components for the drones, or is attempting to source high-tech components from abroad by circumventing Western sanctions. Um, Russian defense industrial base could also be struggling to figure out how to produce more drone components domestically using Iranian production licenses. Russia may alternatively be prioritizing production of decoy drones to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses instead of focusing on more costly Sahid drone strikes. Um, we'll see where this goes. It could be a production problem. It could be them reprioritizing resources to decoy drones and leveraging their ballistic and cruise missiles over Sahid drones. There's been a fairly high rate of intercepts here, like up here in this particular air strike package. The Russians launched 124 Sahid drones. 57 were forced down over Kharkiv, Poltava, etc. And that is another 67 of them were lost. So the way this is typically worded, if they're downed, that means they're shot down, whether by Gepards or aircraft or whatever means they have. And then lost is typically the Russians will lose communication with the drone somehow, usually through electronic warfare, and they will just crash or be destroyed. So that's typically how that nomenclature works there. So between those two, the vast majority of those drones were taken down. Okay, going on to Ukrainian drones before we get to the rest of the news here. More of a political outlook on the headlines after that. Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, still no news on his, how to put it. There's a ongoing problem with his transparency and the what's the right term? I'm trying to think of the department. There was a Ukrainian Department of Anti-Corruption, and Umerov is being charged with obfuscating a few things. So, gotta call it what it is. Umerov is not exactly the most honest egg in the whole carton there, I guess, but that's just the way it goes. Announced that the Ukrainian drone line project, on the February 10th as part of the ongoing Ukraine efforts to integrate ground and drone operations. Umerov stated that the Ukraine military will scale up 5 existing drone regiments and brigades in the Ukraine military and border guard service and will integrate infantry and drones into a single strike system, which will enable Ukraine forces to create kill zones of up to 10 to 15 kilometers. So this is like front line and then near rear areas. So any point of assembly for Russian forces, for their mechanized forces, will have to be pushed back 15 kilometers, basically. That's good because that will give the Ukrainians with their recon drones more time to detect any mechanized forces assembling and moving through the no man's land. Which will provide constant aerial support and infantry cover and will detect and destroy Russian forces before they can approach Ukrainian positions, like I said. What else we got? Ukraine's ground forces reported that the expansion of 5 such existing drone units is only the first stage of the drone line project, and that this project will likely formalize and provide additional support to ongoing Ukrainian efforts to expand drone units and increase their coordination with regiments and brigades. We saw this kind of success with Pischane, Pekrovsk. So that was probably an experimental theater of operations for them because we're also seeing them work with unmanned ground vehicles with drones with machine guns. So Ukrainians are using the opportunity to test their own drones against the Russians in this case in that sector. What else? Yeah, so this is an interesting part here because where the Ukrainians are trying to horizontally expand their forces with the drone capabilities, Russians are trying to centralize drone units. Russian efforts to centralize drone units have attempted to augment Russian drone capabilities by expanding state control over drone operators and developers and increasing their incorporation in the Russian military bureaucracy. The Russian military began efforts to centralize drone operators and developers in fall 2024, disbanding informal Russian drone detachments and removing drone specialists from regular military units, then selectively reorganizing them to form new Russian Ministry of Defense controlled drone units and centralizing their assets, making them their own department, I would suppose. Russian MOD also reportedly established the first separate unmanned systems regiment, specialists saying, at the military district level in January 2024, further highlighting ongoing efforts to centralize and bureaucratize control over drone operations. So, for any new listeners, if you have any questions, please let me know. Usually during our live show, I can answer questions much more quickly. I do check comments every once in a while on uploads, but I'm a little slower with that. But as far as if there's, I feel like there might be a question or two from people that might be just listening to this for the first time. The way the Russian MOD works is that they have, well, even Ukraine to an extent, um, their old Soviet command chain divides their military into districts, and those districts are made of typically colonel generals. It's the name of their rank, and those districts have certain assets at that level. Those could be fire mission packages like thermobaric artillery, and also for what we're seeing here, they're moving those drone units to a military district level decision, I guess. So you're going to have your colonel general in charge of artillery packages and his drone regiment, and he'll choose where to deploy that asset. Whereas with Ukraine, it's a lot more flexibility and kind of grassroots in a weird way. Um, they're going to be able to move these drone companies between many different sectors and have a more disbursement with those specialists. So it's kind of an interesting inverse of a developing asset. So we'll see which one's been more effective at the end of the war. But arguably in Pokrovsk, it sounds like the Ukrainian drones have been pretty successful. But as well, we saw in Kharkiv Oblast near Lipsy, uh, the Russians had, what was it? No, I think that was, sorry, Luhansk, where they said they had a quantitative advantage. That's kind of the interesting thing about centralization. It does allow you to scale up production of drones, but on the flip side of that, Ukrainians have been much more adaptive in their drone warfare. But at the same time, they have been scaling up quite a lot, though. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, it's also much more adaptive, but not at the scale of the Russian military defense industrial base capacity. You know what I'm saying? Okay. All right. So we'll cover. I got my notes here. We got a section on POWs, North Koreans, and a few other sections here. But we'll cover the POWs first. So unfortunately, the Russians have been executing more Ukrainian POWs. This one is from Kursk. Uh, I'm going to say this a few times, guys. This particular video is heavily viewer discretion advised. If you have kids, please don't watch this or fast forward past this slide. But it is something I do need to document and show because these are genuine war crimes. There's been I'm seeing at least one video a week at this pace of Russians executing Ukrainian POWs. Um, I don't know how else to put it. Like, if it's not talked about, people don't know about it. And by not talking about it, I would almost say it's condoning Russian actions. It needs to be covered because Russia has been just flagrantly violating any conventions for the rules of war. Typical civilians will say, well, it's war, there are no rules. I'm like, no, there are reasons why we have rules for war, so we can avoid atrocities and hold people accountable for for what would be just not humane things. I don't know how else to put it. Like there are reasons why you don't just go and do unmentionable things. I'm trying to be as PC as possible to still stay and upload this on YouTube, but there you can leave it to your imagination what would be not mentionable but would be done if we didn't have any conventions against those things. And by reporting this, I'm at least verbalizing some sort of pushback against this. So I know how lame that sounds, but it does need to be put out to the general public in some fashion. I'm doing my small part for that. That's all I can say. Anyway, over to the subject matter. The Financial Times published an investigation on February 20th supporting ISW, or Institute for the Study of War's long-held assessment that Russian military commanders are either complicit in or directly enabling subordinates to execute Ukrainian POWs in clear violation of international law. So for any new listeners, a lot of these notes I pull from ISW, or the Institute for the Study of War, and kind of put them all together and kind of just read off their notes and go through what I think is the most important over the last week or two, in this case 2 weeks, and I'd also try to pull sources I find or from them and put them into a presentable format. And anyway, so the FT investigation said that Ukraine frontline units are often the primary source of execution reports and drone footage of executions. FT noted, however, that tracking these executions is challenging because the Ukrainian units do not always relay reports of POW executions to their commanders. FT noted that Ukrainian prosecutors sometimes find about the executions based on footage published online. FT, you can see why they would not report that, because it would affect unit morale, telling them that, yeah, your buddy over in Second Company got killed by Russians in this very violent way. Uh, Last month, maybe 3 weeks ago, there was a particular one where 6 Ukrainian POWs were captured by the Russians. Um, they were one by one killed by the Russians, and the cherry on top of all of it was that one of the Russians was wearing one of those red flag patches with Jesus' face on it. And I'm not anti-Christian, everyone knows that, but at the same time, the Russian Orthodox symbolism of what that is, and the guy executing soldiers that way, it's just evil. You just have to call it what it is. Any good Christian would not be killing innocent people like that. And I was pretty disgusted when I saw that, and you could kind of just sense the emotion in my voice right now. It's just evil, and I'm not gonna show that right now, but we'll press on here. FT interviewed the co-founders of a project reportedly affiliated with Ukrainian military intelligence, who stated that many Ukrainian units do not publish information about executions, quote, because it has become routine, and that there are likely hundreds of instances of POW executions beyond the dozens recorded so far. FT's investigation suggests that more senior Russian commanders may be complicit in issuing orders to execute Ukrainian POWs. Ukrainian officials opened an investigation into 43 executions with 109 victims in 2024, and FT analyzed footage of 30 of these instances with 133 victims. The FT investigation found that Russian forces across the front line, particularly in eastern Ukraine and Zaporizhzhia Oblast, are executing Ukrainian POWs, not just a few isolated rogue Russian units, as has been reported by the Russian infospace. Global Rights Compliance President Wayne Jordash, who's assisting Ukrainian investigations into POW executions, told the FT report that Russia is pursuing, quote, a strategy of criminality in Ukraine, including by torturing, sexually assaulting, and otherwise abusing residents in occupied Ukraine, and that POW executions are also part of the criminality campaign. Jordash also stated that Russian executions of Ukrainian POWs function to degrade Ukraine's military and security apparatus, leaving Ukraine more vulnerable to aggression. For anyone that has a want of a devil's advocate in this case, the most objective thing I can say about the treatment of Ukrainian army for Russian POWs is based off UN and Red Cross reports. And if you have your problems with those sources, that's the people reporting it. It's the only legitimate source I can pull from and give that sort of report. Point is that the reporting on both sides' treatments of POWs, Ukrainian treatment of Russian POWs is much, much better, obviously. Their prison conditions are much more humane. They don't put them in stress-inducing positions, sleep deprivation, or starve them, like we've seen so consistently with Ukrainian POWs returning. And the only abuse that they really get is there are several junctures from the front line to the pickup to the drop off at the prison. So you can kind of roughly say it's in 3 sections. The first, the only real abuse that's been recorded is when they get made POWs on the front line and they're still in the capturing unit, um, where they're picked up and sometimes physically abused. That has been recorded. Usually just beatings, that sort of thing. But then they're dropped off probably to a military police unit or some other unit to move them into the far rear where they're dropped off in a prison. Those 2 points haven't been recorded as abusing Russian POWs. So that as much as I can report on that. But yeah, so this particular video is from Kursk. This was reported by Ukraine Ombudsman Dmitry Lubinets. This was, according to one of the Ukrainian soldiers, the victims were fighters of the 2nd Brigade. Footage shows a Russian occupier deliberately shooting a Ukrainian POW in the head. Again, guys, viewer discretion is heavily advised. I'm going to age restrict this video on YouTube, obviously, simply for this, though, but it has to be shown. As Ukraine Parliament Commissioner of Human Rights Dmitry Lubinets has already appealed to the UN and the International Committee of the Red Cross, the execution of prisoners is a blatant violation of the Geneva Convention and all norms of international humanitarian law. Okay, so this is the video, guys. I'll give you 5 more. I giving you 5 more seconds to move anyone or move this away from anybody, right? So, okay. Anyway, so here's the video, guys.
Информация есть, мужики. Лица закройте, лица свои закройте. Какая еще информация? Автомат. 82-я рота. 82-я бригада. Громче. 82-я бригада. 6-я рота, 2-й бат. Откуда шли? Лицо свое сюда показывай.
So what we're seeing here is that he's being given a last smoke. You can see by his helmet that he was obviously wearing and this packet of cigarettes, and he's got it in his right hand here. So I don't know if that's like bad humor I'm not getting, but yeah, giving him his last smoke before he's executed is meditated, it would seem like.
Откуда шли? Куда шел? Людей эвакуировали, подорвались и хотели выйти домой. Подорвались где? На ТМ-ке, на машине. Сейчас с какого направления идете? Откуда, блядь, оттуда? Где место высадки ваше было? А? Суджа. Суджа идете? Сколько вас еще здесь?
Больше
нет, мы вдвоем идем. Сука, правду говори. Целый день идем вдвоем. Было 4, осталось 2. Сука, правду говори. Было 4, осталось 2. Правду говори. Правда говорю. Ты что пиздишь? Не пизжу.
You can see the other Ukrainian here was shot repeatedly and has been dead for some time. A lot of blood loss. At that point, that's just mutilation. Yeah.
Где, сука, остальные? Ты что определила? Этот мой. Остальные где? Где остальные? Меня не смей. Твари ебаные. Не кончай, Викторович.
See 3 bodies, I think, there.
Ты что определила? Этот мой. Остальные где? Где остальные? Меня не смей. Твари ебаные.
That's just a pack, so it's just sorry. Okay.
Кончай. Нихуя никому подкрали. Нихуя. Я вчера тебе говорил, что ты за это получишь. Я сказал, выставляйте. Чиф. Хорошо будет, мы услышали. Ну все, вот они, пидоры, 2. Минус 2 гондона.
And the Russians are the ones that post this online. Yeah. This is of their own volition that they report these things. So, anyway, I apologize. I can't apologize because this has to be reported. As regrettable as this is, that is what's happening on the front. Russians are doing very evil things. It has to be talked about. Okay, 1 second, guys. I need to blow my nose. Sorry about that. Okay. Moving over to North Korea news and the Kremlin. Sorry. The Kremlin may be settling information conditions to justify an influx of North Korean citizens arriving into Russia to either join Russia's workforce or the Russian military. Russian ambassador to North Korea, Alexander Matsugora, claimed that North Korea and Russia are increasing educational cooperation, that professors from North Korean universities, that'll be interesting, will travel to Moscow, Kazan, Novosibirsk, and Vladivostok cities for, quote, a long period of time to teach Korean in Russian universities, and the Russian universities are preparing 3-month internships for North Korean students. Interesting. Yeah, a true integration with the East, it seems like, in this case. Matsugora's statements following South Korea's National Intelligence Service, or NIS, report on February 9th that North Koreans are increasingly entering Russia on student visas to take construction jobs. And Russian official claimed that Russia is sending experienced Russian military personnel to North Korea for medical treatment. So this is an odd report. I'll read through it and give you some thoughts. Matsugora claimed that Russia has sent hundreds of wounded soldiers who fought in Ukraine against Ukraine, sorry, to North Korea for rehabilitation and medical care, and North Korea refused North Russia's offer for financial compensation for medical care, food, and other expenses related to Russians' stay in North Korea, doing it on their own bill. This is just an odd favor. The Russian military command has reportedly been sending wounded personnel back into assault groups without treatment, demonstrating a general disregard for soldiers' health in the Russian military and calling into question official Russian claims to be sending Russian soldiers abroad for treatment, particularly to North Korea. The arrival of combat experienced Russian soldiers, particularly if they include officers or non-commissioned officers, North Korea may allow the Russian military to work with North Korean forces and disseminate lessons learned from the war back to North Korea during while recuperating. Uh, Interesting report, but this is from again the Russian ambassador in North Korea. So maybe take it with a grain of salt, but that's an interesting flex there by North Korea if that is true. And yeah, anyway. Moving on here, some more numbers here about Russian losses. Russia reportedly lost just over 5,000 tanks and armored fighting vehicles during 2024 compared to 3,000 in 2023. The British International Institute for Strategic Studies, or IISS, estimated on February 10th that Russia lost 1,400 main battle tanks, roughly 4 division tanks worth, and over 3,700 IFVs and armored personnel carriers, totaling 5,100 lost tanks and armored vehicles in 2024. Data from the Ukraine General Staff indicates that Ukraine forces damaged or destroyed over 3,000 Russian tanks and almost 9,000 armored vehicles in 2024. And IIS's estimates likely only account for destroyed tanks and armored vehicles. IISS assessed on the 24th February, February 2024, that Russia would be able to sustain its then rate of, pardon me, let me restate that. IISS assessed in February 2024 that Russia would be able to sustain its then rate of vehicle losses over 3,000 tanks and IFVs and APCs annually as of 2023 until February 2026 or 2027 by refurbishing vehicles from Soviet-era storage facilities. It remains unclear if the Russian military command will remain willing or able to sustain this increased rate of armored vehicle losses in 2025, as Russian forces appear to be adapting their tactics to limit such losses. That's why it's important for me to report what would be the right term, an interrogative information in these theaters. Noting what tactics their units are using, whether it's small infiltration tactics with fire teams or with the North Koreans, wave assaults with 50 to 100 people in the middle of a snowy field, or if the Russians are using mechanized platoon, company, or platoon, company, or battalion mechanized assaults. It shows a few things, right? Whether they're prioritizing holding on to those military assets, or if it's much more, how to put it, that the rate of attrition of those armored vehicles is so high that they have to use just simple bodies and throwing it at the Ukrainians more often. And also the amount of engagements that we're seeing. I haven't seen the recent report on daily Russian attacks. It should be below 100. I have to confirm that though, so don't hold me to that. I believe that it was still trending below 100 combat engagements a day. We did see a couple spikes every once in a while, but it's down from 300 to 200 down to below 100 still, if I am correct. And along with what we're seeing with the increase of attrition on the Russians on their armored vehicles, this war is probably much closer to a culminating point for the Russian offensive power than we're probably understanding, because we're dealing with bottom figures here. We're dealing with visually confirmed losses, and it doesn't account for all losses that are obviously also undocumented. And again, that also goes in part and parcel with accounting for aerial footage of those tank and IFV depots that are taken from satellite footage. We don't see what's inside the buildings, but we can also roughly assess the condition of a lot of these vehicles that are outside of those storage facilities. A lot of them are not looking very good. Let's see here. Okay, I said we talked about that. Russian forces have continued to use fewer armored vehicles in Donetsk Oblast and throughout the front line, possibly due to Ukrainian drone operations, equipment constraints, or non-conducive ground conditions brought about by rainy weather. Spokesman for Ukrainian combat group stated on the 13th of February, the successful Ukrainian drone strikes have been the main factor, and not poor weather and ground conditions, prompting Russian forces to use fewer vehicles than usual along the front line. It was also noted that Russian forces have issues supplying shells to some unspecified frontline positions, possibly due to successful Ukrainian strikes against Russian ammo depots, and have thus decreased the intensity of shelling in such areas. On that note, though, there's a report that says that up to half of Russian artillery now is supplied by North Korea. There's an interesting caveat to that, though, is that obviously is, how to put it, decreasing the deterrence of South Korea against North Korea, right? Because North Korea has to leverage their artillery as a deterrence against attack by South Korea, if that was ever a thing. Because the threat's always that they have so many large caliber guns they could level Seoul in 30 minutes, right? But by depleting their stockpile of, Koksan 170 millimeter self-propelled artillery, and the 152s that the Russians use, stuff like that, that's decreasing that deterrence against South Korea, and it's going to have an effect asymmetrically in the the Far East theater with China, because North Korea is a friend of China. So it's a lot of different degrees. You see what I'm saying? I won't get into all the details, but anyway, I'll just leave it at that. But that Russia is also not able to produce the majority of their shells from that report. It's just one data point. It's interesting to note. So that means that the West is only scaling up production still. It eventually will surpass Russian artillery production. That's going to mean quite a few things. That means that the initiative will eventually swing back to Ukraine if the Russians maintain this offensive tempo, the Russians don't find a way around these production constraints, and if North Korea does have the option to still dip into their artillery reserve, but we've seen quality reports on North Korean artillery, which is very predictable. And if they decide to start constricting that supply, then eventually it will swing back to Ukraine's favor. So, just interesting to note. I mean, there's a lot of metrics we're seeing here that are showing fatigue and a major attrition of Russian forces. But we'll get to the last part here. It remains unclear if Russia can can repair and newly produce a sufficient number of tanks and armored vehicles to replace losses in Ukraine and equip new Russian units. IISS assessed the Russian refurbished and built over 1,500 tanks and 2,800 IFVs and APCs in 2024, suggesting that Russia produced enough vehicles to replace all of its tank losses and 3/4 of its armored vehicles losses that year. Again, the vast majority of these tanks are refurbished tanks, mainly T-72s, T-62s, and T-55s. T-55s are an anomaly. They're a small data set, and not many of them are at the front, but they are on the front. A lot of the T-80s are almost gone. Based off the footage I've seen from Perun and other sources, the Russians are out of T-90s in storage, but they are still producing T-90s. Don't get me wrong. But that number fluctuates between 200 to 300 a year. And what else? I'm trying to think here. Yeah, so if based off those numbers, all they got mainly because a lot of the T-64s we see are Ukrainian builds, and the T-62 was the export model, if I remember right. Anyway, there's a lot of old Soviet production stuff that I won't get into. But at the same time, so we're seeing more elite units getting the newer equipment, older units getting the older, more shoddy equipment, T-55s, T-62s, some T-72s, and as we've said over, even last year, there's going to be this eventual splitting of qualitative differences between Russian units. You can see newer VDV units, some naval infantry units with like good equipment, some modern AKs and T-90M tanks, stuff like that. You start seeing a lot of the motorized rifle brigades, regiments with old T-62s and MTLBs and stuff like that, right? BMP-1s, and that's going to be what we're seeing going forward, I think, though, especially in this year. IISS assessed that Russia's ongoing effort to expand the Russian military and create new military units is exacerbating equipment shortages, and noted that Russia may be suffering from a shortage of spare parts to refurbish tanks and armored vehicles. IISS assessed that it is highly likely that Soviet-era tanks and armored vehicles remaining in Russia's stores are in deteriorated condition, which may complicate Russia's ability to offset high equipment losses in 2025 and beyond. Zelensky, citing Ukrainian intelligence, report on the 8th that Russia is committing to form new divisions, and former Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced on March 2023 that Russia aimed up to stand up 14 new military divisions in the coming years. This is on part with the new numbers we're seeing. The Russians want to stand up 150,000 or 15 new divisions and allocate them towards Belarus and the Baltic states, if I remember that report right. The Russian military command appears to be balancing allocating refurbished and newly produced vehicles between new formations and formations that have been fighting on the front line for several years, and Russia may struggle to adequately equip these units with material in the long term if the Russian military continues to burn through its Soviet-era stocks, without significantly increasing Russia's ability to produce new tanks and armored vehicles. Okay, a little bit of an update from Pokrovsk as far as tactics and other stuff goes in that sector. I just reposted the map there for you guys to have a point of reference. Okay. Russian advances south and southwest of Pokrovsk have slowed over the last 2 weeks, amid indications that Russian military command may prioritize offensive operations against Konstantinivka, like I talked about earlier with the fortress belt cities, and the southernmost point of Ukraine's fortress belt in Donetsk Oblast in spring and summer 2025. Russian forces made rapid advances aimed at expanding the Russian salient south and southwest of Pokrovsk in December and January, but Russian advances have slowed southwest of Pokrovsk since early February this year. Zelensky stated on the 14th that during the Munich Security Conference that the situation in Pokrovsk has improved in recent days, but was, and the spokesman of the Ukraine Brigade in Pokrovsk stated that Russian activities become less intense in those days. Russian forces have struggled to advance north of Koltne, which we talked about, and Pischane. And one Russian blogger expressed concern on the 15th that slowing Russian advances may allow Ukrainian forces to launch a significant counterattacks in coming weeks, and risk giving the Ukrainian forces the opportunity to collapse the Russian salient south of Pokrovsk. That would be amazing if that happened. But we'll see. I don't see it happening. The Ukrainians are just now based off the lack of report. I'm going off the lack of evidence, I know, but the lack of complaints about Ukrainian mobilization, maybe that's a sign that they're starting to alleviate that problem. You know, the lack of evidence doesn't mean that there is evidence of something to put forth, right? Obviously, but at the same time, it's like if they're not reporting it as hard as they used to with regards to like the 155th Brigade, like we talked about a few weeks ago, maybe that means something. And there's also reports of success we'll talk about later in the mobilization side of things, of the Ukrainians offering new contracts for 18 to 25-year-olds. But we'll get to that later. What else? Russian blogger and former Storm Z instructor claimed on the 15th that Ukrainian drone operations are significantly impeding Russian activity in the Pokrovsk direction. He stated that Ukrainian drone strikes are striking Russian forces operating more than 3 kilometers north of and west of Silidove. So again, like we talked about, Silidove is this city. I'm sorry, my mouse is not showing on the presentation here. Here we go. Okay, I had to click it there for a minute. So Silidove is right here. This is really the node for all of this sector right here. So because the Ukrainians are focusing on these ground line communications west and northwest of Silidove, that makes their targeting of those roads there much easier for the Ukrainians to target against Russian assets. Milblogger claimed the Ukrainian. Okay, we already talked about that. Milblogger also suggests that Ukrainian forces have created a strong layered defense comprised of minefields, conventional artillery systems, and strike and recon drones, and are successfully integrating these with ground-based fire systems to improve Ukrainian strike capabilities in the area. Milblogger also expressed concern that Russia so far has is far from reaching parity with Ukrainian drone operations in that area, and noted that excessive Russian formalization efforts have stalled the development of Russia's drone capabilities. That's again a theme we've been saying. The Ukrainians have actually surpassed Russia in comparable drone capabilities. Not necessarily in every sector, because we did talk about the quantitative difference in one of the sectors, but the capability range is obviously better for the Ukrainians. Russian military command may intend to prioritize assaults at Konstantinivka in 2025 and are thus reportedly not reinforcing the Russian force grouping south of Pokrovsk. So, a few weeks ago, I kind of felt that it was culminating for the Russians in this sector. This kind of bears that out a little bit. Ukrainian military observer Konstantin Mashavet stated on the 15th that Russian military command has redeployed elements of the 8th Combined Arms Army of the Southern Military District from Kharkov direction, which would be here south of Sivka, along this reservoir right here, to Toretsk in that direction. So seeing that data right here, and then what we're seeing on the map, let me bring it up again. Close that out, and then I'll bring up the map again. Okay, so that's being stupid again. Let me bring up the studio mode so I can find it one more time. Here we go. And the map. Okay, so I don't know why that didn't show up the first time. Okay, so yeah, what we're seeing here are those reports that the 8th Combined Arms Army is, where is it at? That is, okay, yeah. Is that right? Yeah, so this is the area right here. They're pulling units and not reinforcing this entire salient, but moving them over toward Toretsk right here. So on the map, we talked about the city fortress belt right here. It's all this right here. And then we also saw the Ukrainians counterattacking into Toretsk, because if these two data sets represent something, the Ukrainian counterattacks and then the Russians moving assets and personnel into this area to move up against Konstantinivka here, and along with the efforts in Chasiv Yar, moving again from east and southeast against this first city here. That means that this is a premeditated, concentrated effort by the Ukrainians to hold on to Toretsk even longer. Uh, that's just a feel, really, but based off these two data sets and what we're seeing here with the drone footage and Ukrainian damaged vehicles deep inside Toretsk still. That means the Ukrainians want to hold on to this piece of real estate to keep the Russians as far from Konstantinivka as possible. So that is interesting. I don't know what that really means. I think that over time we'll see something manifest to where the Ukrainians will try to keep the Russians in urban environments as long as possible, because they typically they fare particularly well in an urban environment against the Russians. The Russians fare a little bit better in open terrain where artillery can be used much more concentrated on force belts and stuff like that. Anyway, that's an interesting data set. I just want to share that with you guys. What else we got? Season Pokrovsk. We talked about the Russia season Pokrovsk, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen now. And if the Ukrainians can counterattack, pinch off this salient, I'm not going to give them like a total victory in this sector here, obviously, right? But if they could pinch off and maybe take Sevchenko, hopefully take Silodove, because that'd be an operational victory. That'd be amazing. That would threaten Hirnki and all of this again, and Kharkov would be threat of being taken by the Ukrainians again. That would be not a strategic victory, but definitely an operational victory, and that would be something that Ukraine could bring forward, saying, well, we can still mount combat operations even against Russian offensives. That would be a major win, rhetorically speaking, on the political stage internationally. So, nothing even close to that happening right now. Don't get me wrong, but the counterattacks, usually small victories build into medium victories, which hopefully build into big victories. So we'll see. Okay, going over to the political side here, guys, we're going to talk a little bit about the timeline of events with the negotiations. There's been a lot of confusion about it, and to be frank, I just don't have an answer why Trump's doing the things he's doing. Aside from his spite against Western liberal hegemony. That's about the only logic in any of this. The other bit of logic, possibly, this is remote. There's only been one story about this from the, oh my goodness, I forgot the Chinese source it came from. Doesn't matter. But it is out there somewhere that there was a memo or a leak of some sort from the Chinese general staff, for lack of a better term, forgot exactly the source, said that the concerned about American overtures to persuade Russia to come more to their side. They're worried that that's an attempt to isolate China. Again, that's one story. I need at least two more to really kind of get a good feel for that. Um, I'm a little bit more, if there's two, then I'm kind of like, that's a maybe, right? But just one is just kind of an anomaly. But if that is Trump's long-term 4D chess play, the caveat to that is that, well, you're pulling in Russia with a population of 140 million-ish, with a GDP that's significantly smaller than Europe. He's pushing Europe toward China. Like, you have to hold on to your friend and then draw in the other guy if you want to isolate China, and it maybe get India involved. But I don't see him really pushing that ever since that whole Twitter blow up with Musk. Because Indians love leaving India, and if they were going to isolate China further, you'd have to push India to be a little bit more belligerent against China, bring in Russia with some sort of incentive, at least be neutral toward China, and keep Europe on your side. But he's kind of doing the opposite of that. He's pushing Europe towards China. He's courting Russia, but without demanding any real concessions, so Russia can still do what they want to do. And India's just kind of ambivalent and still purchasing Russian oil. So none of this is really bearing out to be a 4D chess move. It's just Trump incompetence and complicity, really, ultimately in the end, because it sounds like with Tulsi Gabbard being his national security advisor, or not, she's not national security advisor. She's in charge of like all the intelligence agencies. That a lot of the European intelligence agencies are super concerned about that. That there's going to be a lot of leaks towards China and Russia because of Tulsi Gabbard. The unfortunate half of that, though, and this is the problem with that peace dividend, is that so much of the European intelligence apparatus is dependent upon DC. It's crippling how dependent the Europeans have become on on the Americans, not only militarily but also intelligence-wise. The attempt at the Rheinmetall CEO was a combination of German and American intelligence. Whether or not who had the greater proportion of intelligence that was worth anything, I don't know. But that the Americans had intelligence also to stop that assassination attempt on a German defense CEO, and the Germans had some, but again, they had to rely on American intelligence, is a little bit more telling. That's just one example. I don't feel that it's going to take a long time for the Europeans to disentangle their intelligence agencies from the CIA and FBI and all these other organizations, and to stand up something of their own that's a little bit more robust. And to say the least, it's going to take them decades to get even equal to the American intelligence apparatus. So this has been a long time coming, but because of European politics, they haven't stood any of this up as soon as they should have. They've had 10 years, really. I mean, oh, you can even argue 2008 when the Georgian War started. But anyway, we'll press on with the negotiations here and kind of go over the timeline a little bit. So it really all started when Trump held a bilateral phone call with Putin and then had a phone call right after that with Zelensky. It's still my opinion that I think Zelensky, him getting the last word is a benefit, and because Trump does act on the last person in the room, typically, whoever talks to him. Zelensky and J.D. Vance on the 14th, 2 days after, met on the sidelines at the Munich Security Conference. Vance noted the importance of dialogue between United States, Russia, and Ukraine, and declined to speculate on the possible conditions of a future peace agreement in order to, quote, preserve the optionality. Anyway, for the delegations. Vance and Zelensky both noted that the conversation was productive, and Zelensky thanked the United States for continued military support. Trump told reporters on the 14th that Ukraine would have a seat at the table during peace negotiations with Russia to end the war. The Kremlin reportedly ordered Russian government-linked media to reduce reporting of Trump and to portray Putin as a strong and decisive leader after the meeting on the 12th with Putin on the phone call. They're worried about Trump being seen as more decisive and impacting on the global stage than Putin on the war, which, based off media coverage, that's internationally, it seems that way. Putin hasn't been able to change the dynamics of the war really at all. Uh, Trump just flailing around incompetently has been gaining a lot more attention just based off the sheer potential that he can unleash against Russia or withdraw from Ukraine. Russian news outlet Meduza reported on the 14th that the Kremlin instructed Russian state-run. Sorry, we already talked about that. Meduza reported that Kremlin is also concerned the Russian public might see Trump as more proactive and decisive leader than Putin, and wants Russian media to emphasize that Putin alone is responsible for the outcome of the negotiations between him and Trump. Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held a telephone call on the 16th to, quote, open a channel of communication, unquote, for future talks about Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs claimed that Rubio and Lavrov agreed to maintain a channel of communication to resolve issues in the U.S. Russian relationship, to remove barriers to trade, economic, and investment cooperation, and to work together on ending the war in Ukraine and solving issues in the Middle East. On that note, a recent UN vote went all for United States and Russia. Ukraine floated a resolution in the General Assembly about naming Russia the aggressor in the war against Ukraine. Russia, United States, Israel, North Korea, Iran, and a handful of others, with all the usual suspects, voted against it. It wasn't even that the United States said we abstain or didn't vote. They said no. They said Russia's not the aggressor. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. It's just like, well, Israel, America, and Russia are all just saying no. Ukraine's the aggressor in the war. I mean, like it's one or the other, right? And yeah, I don't know. That's it speaks for itself. What can you say? Trump's priorities are the Middle East with that little nation and China. If foreign diplomacy is any metric of intent, then that is definitely what we're seeing. And again, on the last thing was to organize future meetings to improve foreign missions in the United States and Russia. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs claimed that Rubio and Lavrov agreed to work to restore mutually respectful interstate dialogue and to hold regular contacts, etc., etc. Rubio stated on CBS on the 16th that his phone call with Lavrov was meant to establish communications for future efforts aimed at reaching a peace agreement in Ukraine. And moving over toward the meeting in Riyadh, Russian American officials met in Saudi Arabia for bilateral talks about the war in Ukraine on the 18th. So it's about every 2 days. It seems like things are happening because we had the phone call on the 12th, the Vance and Zelensky met on the 14th, then on the 16th, Lavrov and Rubio had a call. Then on the 18th, they met in Saudi Arabia. Russia continues to display no indications that it's prepared to make any meaningful concessions on Ukraine as assessed by Western intelligence and U.S. officials in line with ISW's longstanding assessment. Just today, there was a couple of things. Let me see if I can find it here. Let's see here. There was a leak by Financial Times. Financial Times seems to be on the ball on all these early pickups about a couple things. We do have to talk about uh, the mineral deal that supposedly Zelensky's going to sign in a week or two. What else? I'm trying to find the leak that Russia has flatly refused to um, agree to any concessions in the war. It was posted early this morning, so I have to scroll up here. 1 second. Okay. Think this is it. Let me bring it up here. See if I can bring that up on the Telegram media viewer. 1 second, guys. That is something else, I think. Sorry, I gotta find my properties here. That should be popping up. Why is that not showing? That should be okay. Let me figure out something else here, guys. 1 second. I apologize. Hmm. Well, it's not showing here, so I'll just have to show it to you guys, unfortunately, or just read it off to you guys. So this is from ISW. This was posted today, and the Kremlin officials formally rejected the possibility of ceasefire on any terms other than the complete capitulation of Ukraine and the West on February 24th. Sergei Lavrov claimed the 24th during a press conference in Turkey that Russia will only stop military activity in Ukraine when peace negotiations bring about, quote, a solid, stable result that suits Russia, unquote, and that account for the realities on the battlefield, Russian narrative. Lavrov noted that any peace agreement must include provisions banning Ukraine from joining NATO, and Russian state TV Channel 1 summarized Lavrov's statements as, quote, Russia will only end combat operations with negotiations in a way that satisfies Russia, unquote. Lavrov, yeah, they want to address the root causes, which was, quote, NATO expansion, and it was also stated that the ceasefire does not address the root causes, of the war, and reiterated that Russia considers NATO's post-1991 eastward expansion a root cause of the war. So we talked about the expansion of NATO being a cause for the war and Russia's logic, but I don't recall ever them saying, and they might have, but I missed it, but to see them state it at this juncture, that they consider the post-1991 eastward expansion of NATO to be the root cause of it. You're telling me for 34, 33 years that this was the root cause of the war? Like, come on, motherfucker. That would push Russia all the way to Germany's border, essentially. Because they want that sphere of influence over the Baltics, Finland as a neutral state, Romania, Hungary, all the other states included, even the Baltics. Oh, sorry, the Balkans, my bad. Yeah, go fuck yourself. Is what I would say to that. It's crazy to think that they are demanding that, but at the same time, we're seeing Trump's incompetence or complicity, making this something that they're verbalizing. I'd imagine some of our European listeners and viewers in this case are probably feeling particularly upset about this. I get it. It's like because of Russian, how to put it? It's not even their military competence, like we've talked about. It's just Russian diplomatic. Their diplomacy is much better than military, obviously, and with them maintaining such a consistent messaging in this whole negotiation process, it's been able to compensate for their lack of military achievement, obviously. And the way Trump's been handling it, just spilling it on the floor essentially, is that the Russians have been able to hold the same consistent message, and in this case, increase their demands by saying that no, 1991 is where we want the borders at for NATO. That would just, yeah, and that is also at the feet of the Europeans. They haven't really invested too much in the militaries since the Cold War. A lot of these guys, including Britain, have been really just leveraging their old Cold War and interwar, like if you want to use that term, between Desert Storm and the present war, their recent developments. And I I really wish Europe would stand on its own 2 feet. I'm not saying that because Trump said it. I'm saying that because Europe needs to. Trump is dangerously against European interests, and as a white nationalist, that is antithetical towards a greater European world view, basically, right? Again, America and the Anglosphere are European nations. They always have been, always will be, and any danger to any ethnicity under that racial intersection is going to diminish us as a whole. And by Europe not standing on its own 2 feet to press back against a Eurasian nuclear power, arguably two Asian nuclear powers invading, North Korea included in that this is infringing upon all of our collective welfare in a sense. I feel that all these how to put it, I'm sorry, I have so many things in my head right now. All of these factors, including together to push towards this declaration by Lavrov, it's a bold move. But he diplomatically, not militarily, but diplomatically has the stance to do it. The Europeans haven't really put into hard power to convince Russia not to do this. As much as they've given money and weapons and artillery shells and scalp missiles and all these things, right? They haven't put the skin in the game to push Russia back. They've given the assets for Ukraine to push back, but if they want to have a genuine power seat at the negotiations to settle their own future, it's gonna have to be boots on the ground. That's again, we're at this juncture because of Biden's handling of the war, really, and the way Ursula von der Leyen has handled it, and the former Chancellor of Germany, I forgot his name, who's head of the SPD, but now he's gone. The new German Prime Minister seems way better, but we'll get to that later. I feel that with all these things going on, like Europe is way late to the game, but like they need to push back against Russia. It's America can't be relied on. Like it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be this at all. Uh, America could do so many things. We could deport. We could militarize our border with Mexico without having to, put tariffs on Canada for whatever fucking reason. Went over that in my article on Radical Dose, and have to alienate all of Europe. Like we could do all these things. We could also, quarantine China if we have to. But the way Trump's handling it, he's fucking up everything. I don't know how else to put it. And by doing that, he is endangering his own interests. Really, he is. America has not had good leadership in quite some time. I can't even. I'm not going to chalk that up to Reagan. Reagan was not a good president. I think. I that's something I'll have to think on and ponder later. But America has had no good leadership. I would say. I don't want to even count Bush. Anyway, we'll press on here, guys. I'm going off the rails, like any podcaster does. But yeah, it's just terrible. NBC reported on the 18th that four Western intelligence agencies and two U.S. congressional officials stated that the intelligence from the United States and unspecified close American allies shows that Putin still wants to control all of Ukraine and his goals remain maximalist. One congressional official stated that there is zero intelligence showing that Putin is interested in any real peace deal right now. Intelligence officials stated that Putin has no plans to withdraw troops from Ukraine or to pull any personnel or equipment from Western Russia. The six officials that stated that Putin may agree to a ceasefire and peace deal in order to give Russia more time to rest and reconstitute, and there is an idea among Western officials that Putin may, quote, go through the motions of negotiations in order to see what concessions he can get and to reintegrate Russia back into the global community. Russian officials in Saudi Arabia began what likely will be an ongoing effort to push the United States into accepting Russia's offers of economic and investment measures in lieu of any actual Russian concessions on Ukraine. This is a really interesting diplomatic play by the Russians, is where, how to put it, Ukraine and the United States were trying to negotiate a mineral deal. On the side of that, the Russians were saying, well, we got rare earths too. We got strategic metals and stuff. We could have that arranged with you and us, America. You don't have to worry about Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. Again, trying to sideline Ukraine and push all this to the side to where a amicable deal is worked out for the Kremlin and the United States, not to Ukraine's benefit. Let me see here. Dmitriev, who was one of the delegates at Riyadh for Russia, stated on the 18th that he would present the U.S. delegation in Saudi Arabia with an estimate that U.S. companies lost an alleged $300 billion by leaving the Russian market. Dmitriev stated that major U.S. oil companies, quote, have a very successful business in Russia, unquote, and that the companies will return to Russia at some point, reasoning that the companies would not forego the opportunities Russia offers in terms of access to Russian natural resources. The caveat on top of that, though, is that Russian oil infrastructure is stupid archaic. Like they're in need of a major overhaul into the tunes of billions of dollars. So they need American and Western or Chinese investment in that sector of their economy to keep these facilities going, because Russia right now has not been investing in that sector to modernize it to what it needs to be at to sustain its output. There was some economics stuff I was watching because there were some videos about that, and they forecasted a decline in Russian oil output over the long term. I don't remember the exact figures per year on year, but that sort of thing. But there will be a decline in Russian oil production because so much oil is being pumped out, but they have to have new technologies and means of digging out the stuff deeper in the earth. The easy stuff's been already pumped out from Grozny and I forgot the name of in Krasnodar Krai, I think, out there. and they need to have this new Western technology and means and specialists to go and dig all the rest of it out. So, um, anyway, Dmitriev claimed that the Russian delegation put forward a number of unspecified economic proposals that the United States is considering, and that he thinks that there could be progress on these in 2 to 3 months. American acceptance of these Russian economic measures without demanding any Russian concessions on Ukraine in return would give away leverage the United States would need to achieve Trump's stated objective of achieving a lasting, enduring peace that benefits the United States and Ukraine. But we'll see. Yeah, that's the problem with Trump, though. He does what is good for him and not for the United States or anyone else. I mean, if his family can get money that way, we're seeing negotiations not between nation states, but between oligarchic clans. It was a term first introduced by one of our Ukrainian friends on the show about 3 years ago. I was kind of confused by what he meant by Jewish clans. I'm like, oh, you mean like Ashkenazi and Sephardic? No, he was meaning like families and the way politics orients those oligarchic families into clans with economic and also sometimes blood relations. So what we're seeing here is, oddly, if this does go the way it might go with Russia and United States swapping economic concessions amongst each other at Ukraine's expense, possibly the Trump family colluding openly with the Russian powers that be for their own benefit. So, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Michael Waltz reiterated on the 18th that that U.S. President Trump, the war must end in a fair, enduring, sustainable, and acceptable to all parties peace, and has remained unchanged. It just goes on a little bit more about that, but I do have an article about Kellogg visiting Ukraine, but we'll get into that in the articles section. I have quite a few articles I want to go over with you guys over the last 2 weeks. U.S. Special Representative for Russia and Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, met with Zelensky on the 20th. Zelensky stated they had a good conversation with Kellogg, during which they discussed the battlefield situation, the return of all Ukrainian POWs, and effective security guarantees for Ukraine. He also reiterated Ukraine's readiness to make strong, effective investment and security agreement with the United States, and that stated that Ukraine has proposed the fastest and most constructive ways to achieve such results. This is a video of them meeting. I'll read the rest of this while this plays here. It was also stated that there was supposed to be a press conference with these two after they had this public meeting and their own closed-door meeting, but it didn't happen. I don't think it's because these two are not amicable to each other. I think it's because of the rumors we're hearing about Kellogg being sidelined, actually. There's the other, see here. Trump has another envoy, which is in charge of Russia and the Middle East, by the name of Witkoff. I think he's prioritizing Witkoff over Kellogg because obviously he prioritizes Israel above everything else. But General Kellogg has been a little too cozy with Zelensky, supposedly, and that Witkoff, with his connections to Israel and Russia, is what we're seeing actuated more towards. So between the two special representatives, Witkoff is definitely in Trump's favor right now. And with what Kellogg had to do by shutting down the press conference, he had to put on a strong face. Is my suspicion, but we'll see. Okay, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff referred to the early 2022 Istanbul protocols as offering guideposts for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine on February 23rd. An agreement based on these protocols would be a capitulation document. The Wall Street Journal and New York Times reported on March and June 2024 that both publications obtained several versions of the draft treaties from the March and April 2022 Ukrainian-Russian peace negotiations in Istanbul, Constantinople, that indicate that both sides initially agreed that Ukraine would forgo its NATO membership aspirations and be, quote, permanently a neutral state that does not participate in military blocs. The draft treaties also reportedly banned Ukraine from receiving any foreign weapons or hosting any more foreign military personnel. Both also reported that Russia pushed for the Ukrainian military to be limited to 85,000 soldiers, 342 tanks, and 519 artillery systems. Russia also reportedly demanded that Ukrainian missiles be limited to a range of 25 miles. arranged that would allow Russian forces to deploy critical systems and material close to Ukraine without fear of counterstrikes. And the draft treaties also reportedly list the United States, the UK, and the PRC, France, and Russia as guarantors of the treaty, and Russia reportedly wanted to include Belarus as a guarantor. This is before the Union State happened. Um, what else? The guarantor states were, quote, supposed to terminate the international treaties and agreements incompatible with the permanent neutrality of Ukraine, including military aid agreements. The draft treaties did not specify if other non-guarantor states would have to terminate their agreements with Ukraine as well, although this is likely considering that the treaty would ban Ukraine from having any foreign supplied weapons. So, yeah, it would, again, essentially isolate Ukraine from any Western assistance or friendship or anything else like that, and by default bring Ukraine into Russia's orbit. This would be essentially the treatment that Russia has given Georgia. Georgia's had an interesting history where there's been genuine grassroots movement to a degree. Again, I'm not going to say there hasn't been some NGOs organizing some of these things because that's been pretty apparent. But at the same time, there are genuine, how to put it, genuine grievances against the occupation of their country. Anyone that has had a foreign military on their own territory obviously would not like that. With the occupation of Ossetia and Abkhazia, which are internationally recognized parts of Georgia's country. But at the same time, the Georgian Dream Party has. I'm trying to put all this together here. The Georgia Dream Party is the current party in power. I don't think they have a majority, but they have a majority rule in their parliament. But the head guy, I forgot his name, but his wealth comes from Gazprom, and his total wealth alone is equal to a quarter of Georgia's annual GDP. Yeah, that'd be like, I don't know, Elon Musk making a quarter of America's total GDP, and he currently heads and funds the Georgian Dream Party. Not Elon Musk, but this guy in particular, in Georgia, and he's been directing the country toward more Russian orbit. So that is the sort of corruption and alignment that Russia uses for their soft power. So something I talked about earlier, but I'll reiterate it again. Really succinctly here. United States relies on NGOs and professionals, air quotes there, for their sort of soft power plays in areas, whether it be doctors, academics, journalists, that sort of thing, right? Russia, on the other hand, is a little bit more about the money. So with this Saakashvili, is that his? Sorry, that just popped in my head. That might be his name. Anyway, he in their particular plays for power, Russia relies on their oligarchs and the money they get from their resource extraction. So with this, I think his name is Saakashvili. He has he has shares in Gazprom, which he makes a lot of money from, and funds his own political wants in Georgia. Another example would be Ilan Shor, who is a Jewish expat living in Israel because he was uh, exiled from Moldova. He heads up the Shore Party, if I remember right, in Moldova, who was also a main contender against Maya Sandu, who is the current president of Moldova. They just had elections, I think, like last month. But he's another billionaire, and he lives in Tel Aviv as a Russian Jew oligarch, basically. And he's been wanted by European authorities because of his genuine election interference, though. And anyway, it's a whole web of rich people trying to get involved in internal affairs in foreign countries. But it's interesting how the United States and Russia have their own methods of soft power play, right? But with what we've seen with Trump, though, recently, is his gutting of that soft power. Now, there are genuine grievances the American people have against the hegemony that rules them. I don't take away the agency of people on most occasions. In this case, I don't either. I think the American people have been not listened to by DC for quite some time. At the same time, however, the way it's working for Russia's favor, and this is a discussion I had with a couple of Russian expats here recently, actually living in America, is that, how to put it, the frustration of people against their leadership in their countries, like we've seen with AFD in Germany, MAGA in America, and a lot of other Western countries, is that there's genuine grievances these people have, mainly immigration, jobs, economy, and foreign wars. And the way Russia takes advantage of that, uh, particularly with AFD, there are known Russian links in the party. I don't think anyone can really deny that. And with, I'm not going to agree totally with the liberal diagnosis of MAGA and Trump's affiliation with Russia, but at the same time, the way he's doing this whole thing with the diplomacy in Ukraine, it's hard to deny that there's not some sort of like convergence of interests here. But beside the point, the poison pill is that Russia's taking advantage of those grievances and propping up parties or interests that are suitable for them. The way they do that, and particularly with AFD as an example, is that AFD is saying, no, we need to pull Germany out of the EU. We need to decrease funding for the Bundeswehr, despite its fucking appalling state. They just need to gut their military completely, become completely defenseless, turn on Russian gas again, and all these things. Like their foreign policy is just part and parcel of what Russia would want from Germany. Domestic, it's a sad reality because of globalization. If we want to get out of it, we need to acknowledge our starting point and what would be beneficial for all parties involved. Um, Becoming a dependent of a Russian or American hegemony is against Europe's interest. Obviously, that's why Europe's moving away from America at this point with Trump in leadership. But at the same time, you have this very strong and rising contingent in Europe of a populism of basically nationalist sentiment, but at the same time being guided, unfortunately, by Russian interests. And I find that very dangerous because, again, like the future in Europe and the West is a much more nationalistic sentiment. But at the same time, after two world wars, I think most people don't want another fratricidal war. That's just the way it is. We don't want another war between European nations. However, because of the political interests and the expediency that the powers that be between America and Europe, Russia, want out of Europe, Europe will fall victim to these power plays again. And Europe, for its own interest, needs to stand on its own two fucking feet again. And I don't know if that's possible. I mean, Frederick Merz, I think is his name, who is the head of the CPD, the Christian Democratic Party, that took not the majority, but is the leading party in Germany right now after their elections recently. He is talking about that though, but at the same time, he's not correcting the same problems that galvanized the right wing in Germany. He went back on his word like one day after the election, saying, "Oh yeah, we're gonna leave the doors open for immigration, so suck it." you know, it's just like these people don't fucking learn. It's just like holy fucking shit, dude. Anyway, it's frustrating because like at the same time their foreign policy is good. They need to stand on their own 2 feet as a power. Uh, Europe has the potential to have many power centers that aren't hostile to each other. You could have France, Britain, Italy, the Intermarium, and Germany, all within their own interests, but all working together. Right? Europe has a lot of potential there. At the same time, because of the democratic system they have and the people that run those systems in Brussels and Berlin, Paris, and London, uh, they're not interested in that though. It's just a tragedy, and only a sort of populism and nationalism can propel them toward the new context everyone's moving towards right now. And unfortunately, that's the sphere where Russian influence is playing an outsized role, though. And that segues into Ukraine, but I'm going to stop it right here because we need to continue with the show. I'm over 2 hours now. Uh, this whole conversation with that because I'm explaining a bit more because we have some new people coming into the show from our expansion into the Americana network. So I know there's going to be a lot of questions. And I'm going to be, for our old audience, I'm going to have to be going over some old stuff we've talked about more than once. So just bear with me because we have to cover the fundamentals before we can talk more about the more advanced things we've talked about on the show. So anyway, bottom of the stack stuff here, guys. So I almost included this in the mobilization stuff here, but we're almost done with the headlines. I'll take a break here in just a few minutes, though, because we'll go into mobilization and the articles after this, though. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense recently launched a Contract 1824 volunteer recruitment program aimed at recruiting 18 to 24-year-old Ukrainians in the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Ukraine MOD officially launched the program in February 11th and noted the program offers 18 to 24-year-olds the ability to join the military under a one-year contract and the option to either reenlist after 1 year or return to civilian life. The Ukraine MOD will pay the volunteers up to 4,700 American dollars upon signing a one-year contract and an additional $19,000 during their service, in addition to a monthly salary of $2,800. Now that's actually kind of competitive in some parts of America. So they get a bonus of $4,700 and an additional $20,000 during their service. So that's going to be paid out, probably every month, on top of their monthly salary of almost $3,000. So you figure 20,000 out of 12 would be 1,200, roughly $1,200 a month on top of 2,800, so about $4,000 a month. I mean, for a Ukrainian salary, that's actually really fucking good. I forgot the Russian payout off the top of my head, but like the Ukrainian economy again is kind of in the dumps right now. So cost of living is pretty cheap, and if you're getting paid, I would say competitive for American salaries, but that would be close to $50,000 annually for an American income, and in Ukraine that's going to stretch quite far. And you're 18 to 24 years old. That's the beginning pay. There's a lot more benefits, and we'll get into that here. Volunteers will receive 3 months of training before deploying to the front line. So of their 12 months, they're going to be in training for 3 months. So you're only going to be at the front for 9 months. So it's kind of interesting. Ukrainian government will subsidize future mortgages, education, medical care for volunteers, and will permit volunteers to travel abroad after their 1 year of service. Program also exempts volunteers from mobilization for 12 months after their 1 year contract ends. So people towards the 24, 23-year end of their life. That sounded bad. You get what I'm saying. People towards 23 to 24 years still have a year exemption that they won't be mobilized in that bracket there. Ukrainian Defense Minister Umarov stated that the Contract 1824 program is part of Ukraine's ongoing efforts to create a professional military. And Ukraine MOD spokesman stated the Ukrainian military will pay 1 million hryvnia, which is about about close to $24,000, to any Ukrainian service members who are under the age of 25 when they sign the contract. So that's on top of everything. That's a lot of money. So that's good. That's going to mobilize a lot of people. And last numbers I got, this was launched on February 11th, so it was about 2 weeks ago. Latest numbers I got, I think it was a few days old, is that they got 10,000 signups already. So that's really good, because the Ukrainians are mobilizing about 30,000 people a month, but that was during their stand-up of new brigades before they were moving over to the core system. So there's a lot of moving parts with the Ukraine military. They've decided not to stand up new units, but to flesh out their veteran units, and then I think they'll probably start sending up more units if they want to. But they're also expanding certain units like 3rd Assault into full-fledged divisions, so they're probably standing up individual battalions. It's there's so much fog of war I can't even really get into it. But yeah, there's a lot of organic stuff happening in the background that I'm waiting to see how these things develop though. But anyway, so good news, and that is fucking competitive, especially for Ukraine. Yeah. Anyway, that's good. That's going to keep a lot of young people in Ukraine too, because or actually probably bring back some from abroad, because if they're paying close to $50,000 and you're living in Ukraine with that sort of money, you're going to have your mortgage subsidized. Holy fuck, that's amazing. You get a house, an education, and medical care on top of $50,000. That's not bad. And you're only going to be in the front for 9 months after 3 months of training. That's tits. Anyway, that's really good. It's way better than anything the Russians are getting. But anyway, bottom of the stack here, the Armenian National Assembly approved a draft law in the first reading on February 12th to commence the process of joining the European Union. Several Armenian civic organizations initiated a bill via petition that garnered enough support, 50,000 signatures, for parliamentary consideration. Legislation on Armenian authorities to launch the EU accession talks is in accordance with the will of the Armenian people. This is from ISW, of course. Yeah, so Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov acknowledged Armenia's sovereign right to pursue EU membership, but urged Armenians to consider whether the EU shares their goals. Shares this goal. He emphasized the benefits Armenia gains as a member of the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union. It's probably better for them, in his opinion. Russian officials and information space commenters previously claimed Armenia's move towards EU membership signaled its withdrawal from the EAEU. Anyway, this is part and parcel logical response to Russia's non-intervention in the most recent Azeri-Armenian conflict, where Nagorno-Karabakh was annexed by Azerbaijan, where there was a very significant enclave, I think of close to 100,000 native Armenians. I'm not getting into all the history because Armenia is a very ancient country, but at the same time, it was an open ethnic cleansing, like genuinely, like they cleansed that area of old Armenian churches and the people there, and wiped out the imprint of the ethnicity in that area. In forgot the yeah again Nagorno-Karabakh, but I forgot the exact city. Anyway, and the world did nothing, but the security guarantor was again Russia, and they did nothing because they're just all balls just all committed to the war in Ukraine here. So that's why they didn't respond. So let me. That's an old slide here, guys. So yeah, we'll leave it off here for right now. I'm gonna go take a small break. So this is about a 4 or 5 minute break here, guys, and we will be right back after that. Let me do the transition here, and then I'll start up the intermission here. So get some water. I'll be right back, and we'll wrap up with the mobilization and rear area stuff, and we'll get into some articles. So I'll see you on the flip side.
Большевики неоднократно стверджували розгром українських національно-визвольних сил. Як є в дійсності? Український національно-визвольний рух живе. Він розвивається і бореться далі, супереч всім намаганням і пропаганді ворога. Большевики стараються стерти з лиця землі українську революційну боротьбу всіми силами свого мілітарно-поліційного апарату, всіми засобами тоталітарної системи і всякими найбільш безоглядними та рафінованими методами. Українська повстанча армія, організація українських націоналістів і ціла українська нація склали в цій боротьбі дуже важкі жертви. Але зламати змагання України за свою незалежність, ні знищити її керівної революційної сили Москві таки не вдалося. Західні держави пізнають і щораз краще розуміють правдиву суть російського імперіалізму і комунізму. Політика поступок, співжиття і примирення з большевизмом на платформі незаторкування довершених ним загарбань не заспокоїла Москви, не спиняє її від дальшого агресивного наступу в різних напрямах. Ця політика остаточно збанкрутувала. В світі щораз більше зростає свідомість, що стримати большевицький імперіалістичний наступ можна тільки рішучим опором і відпором.
Hey guys, and we are back. Yeah, it was about 2 minutes more. A little less than 4 minutes. Anyway, so let's move on into our Russian mobilization here. Let me move my notes around here a little bit, and I'll bring up that window. Let me do the studio mode again. And I got too many things here. And there we are. Okay. Okay, so as far as Russian mobilization goes, Russian federal subjects are reportedly halting the recruitment of foreigners who do not speak Russian for service in the Russian military. Now, this has been a huge manpower pool. It was an interesting thing in 2023 when they opened this up, but we've seen recruits from the Sahel region, Indians, Sri Lankans, Nepalese, Chinese, some other people. But yeah, I mean, there hasn't been a huge amount of people in the Russian armed forces from foreign countries, mainly because they fuck that up. I don't know how else to put it though. There were so many reports of abuse by Russian trainers and units of foreign fighters that volunteered to go over there or were either press ganged into these things. So a lot of Tajiks and Uzbeks who did sign up were forced under, how to put it, false pretenses. So a lot of them were brought in over work visas and contracts, but as soon as they crossed the border and got to like a job site or something like that, they would either be forced to sign the contract by the company or the FSB would raid like a construction site. I've seen video, we've showed video of that here actually. There's a particular one, I think it was Uzbeks, where the FSB lined them all up and said, "You are here illegally. We'll either deport you, or you could stay and get Russian citizenship if you sign a contract with the Russian MOD." So, uh, but that sort of treatment only brings so many people, and you can only fool people for so long. So that eventually dried up. But anyway, so Russian opposition outlet Vertska reported on the 19th that Russian authorities in Moscow are not deploying those who sign military service contracts, but sorry, let me start over again. It was reported on the 19th that the authorities in Moscow Oblast are not deploying those who sign military service contracts but do not speak Russia to training. And a source stated that currently 150 Chinese citizens have signed contracts but are awaiting orders. Two military recruiters told Vertska that other unspecified federal subjects are also largely stopped recruiting foreigners who do not speak Russian. It's because we've been seeing the problems with integrating North Korean forces with Russian forces. There's been a lot of miscommunication and command and control problems. So having foreign fighters that don't speak Russian, obviously, it's going to fuck up how you fight, and they're not going to bring those people in anymore, it sounds like. Language barriers are causing issues on front lines, but Verska also noted the friction due to language barriers is not new among Russian frontline units. It was also reported that one-time payments are also increasing. It was reported on the 18th that the Republic of Mordovia announced that the regional authorities are raising one-time payments for recruits who sign a military contract from $4,000 roughly to $12,000. So that's a huge spike. I wish I had a graph for all this though. There is some graphs that update this periodically. It's about every 4 or 6 months. But yeah, this is about tripling it. Anyway, we've seen these only go up, not go down, and there was a graph I saw recently. I didn't save it, but the typical payout for one-time contracts is about $20,000 on signing, and I forgot the monthly salary. I have to find that again. But yeah, but between like Samara Oblast, I think was close to $30,000 or $40,000. And then also like you get towards like Tula and the far east, like it's not Krasnoyarsk, Khabarovsk, I think it's near Vladivostok. That was below $20,000. So it's relative poverty and relative wealth. If they could pay people less, they will. But anyway, the Russian Far East is being paid less, but at the same time, that probably stretches a bit further. Russian regional authorities are reportedly reducing payments due to regional budget deficits for Russian soldiers who received minor injuries. Something we've been seeing trend also over the last few months. It was reported on the 11th that at least 42 Russian federal subjects and occupation authorities in Crimea introduced a reduced payment for Russian soldiers who sustained minor injuries. Authorities previously offered $5,000 roughly payment to all wounded Russian soldiers, regardless of the severity of the injury. The Russian federal government published a decree on November 2024 establishing reduced payments for Russian soldiers who received only minor injuries in battle rather than providing blanket payments for all injured personnel. It was noted that some Russian federal subjects, including Kamchatka Krai, changed their injury compensation system to align with the federal system in recent months, while others, including Amur Oblast, already had payment systems similar to the federal government's new system. The Kremlin has recently taken measures to reduce various payments to Russian soldiers, including one-time payment bonuses, among other indicators that the Kremlin is concerned about the long-term cost of the war and ongoing wartime pressures on the Russian economy. Okay, for Ukraine here, let's see here. Ukrainian officials continue to highlight Ukraine's domestic defense industry and domestically produced strike capabilities. Zelensky stated during the Ukraine Year 2025 forum on February 23rd, the Ukraine produced 2.2 million FPV drones and over 100,000 long-range drones in 2020 and in 2020. Sorry, that's weird. It must be 2024 is what they mean, and intends to increase its drone production rate in 2025. Zelensky stated that Ukraine produced 154 artillery systems in 2024 and intends to increase the production of artillery systems in 2025, and that Ukraine is working to develop an analog, to the U.S.-provided Patriot air defense system. That's going to be a complicated process because that's a very advanced system. But a lot of these artillery systems, the 154, I think those would be mainly the Bodana systems, which is a Ukrainian equivalent of the French Caesar system, essentially. It's a wheeled, self-propelled artillery gun, basically. It's on wheels and can shoot artillery very quickly. It's a fairly advanced system. It's pretty decent. It's French Caesar's pretty good. The Swedish Archer, I think. I might be thinking of the English equivalent of that, but the Swedes have one that's stupid fucking good. But there's only so many of those produced. And anyway, so what else we got here? Zelensky also noted that Ukraine funded 40%, European countries funded 30%, and the United States funded another 30% of Ukraine's domestic defense production in 2024. So the reason why that's important is because we keep hearing about Trump's leverage on Ukraine, right? So the funding for Ukraine, 70% is already accounted for their defense, for their domestic defense production, and that's kind of the majority. I want to say of Zelensky stated that Ukraine intends to fund 50% of its domestic production in 2025. But the total, let me just read the rest of this here. It's stated by Umarov, who's the Ukraine defense minister, that Ukraine has become the largest producer of tactical and long-range drones in the world. That 96% of Ukraine's military drones are purchased or produced in Ukraine. I don't have the number. It's hard to even like put this into a spectrum of total value, but like the critical systems that would be hampered by American withdrawal from providing support to Ukraine would be, mainly HIMARS systems, Patriot air systems or air defense systems, support for F-16s, which have had a modicum of success. Anything published about their success has been pretty close-lipped. Like we hear about them intercepting cruise missiles and stuff like that, but I haven't heard a lot of strike packages, because we hear about some glide bomb strikes, stuff like that occasionally, but I have not seen a whole lot of reports about F-16s being used in those strikes. But anyway, that's beside the point. But spare parts for F-16s would certainly be a problem if they can't be sourced from America. It'd have to go through a longer supply chain of like maybe through the Netherlands or Denmark or Norway or Sweden or somebody to buy those parts and then send those parts from those purchasing countries to Ukraine. So, yeah, it would certainly affect it in some degree, obviously, but it wouldn't be the debilitating effect that Trump has probably been over-informed on in leveraging against Ukraine. So, it would certainly affect the battlefield space in some capacity. No one's going to deny that, but at the same time, it's not going to be a death blow. Europe has supplied more money and equal-ish defense capabilities to Ukraine. I mean, again, like the tanks is a great example. Ukraine has received several hundred Leopard tanks in several variants. And again, like the United States has a tank park of like 4,000 like Abrams alone, I think. I think they have some like M60s still around somewhere. I don't know. But of the 4,000 tanks alone, they delivered 31. Not even 40. So it's pathetic to say that offensive capabilities have been provided by the United States to any real degree. Defensive capabilities, for sure, Patriot and HIMARS are definitely part of that, but it's not the keystone in the arch of Ukrainian defenses there. So anyway, um, Ukraine's U.S. and European partners continue to work jointly to develop Ukraine's defense industrial base. It was stated that Ukronboronprom signed a joint venture with the French defense company to create advanced technology and provide additional operational support in areas of air defense, radar, and electronic warfare on the 15th. It was also stated that the head on the 15th also that European defense companies KNDS France and KNDS Deutschland will discuss maintaining equipment that Ukraine's partners have transferred to Ukraine and supply of new weapons, including self-propelled artillery systems. Again, probably Panzer Haubitze 2000s and French Caesar systems, I imagine. Delegations also discussed the possibility of jointly producing 155 millimeter artillery systems. There's also, what does it say here? So we'll get in the next thing here about 155 millimeter artillery systems. Czech President Peter Pavel announced the continuation of the Czech-led initiative to provide Ukraine with either large caliber ammunition on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. Reported by Reuters that an unnamed Czech government official reported that by the end of 2024, the Czech initiative will already provide Ukraine with roughly 500,000 155 millimeter artillery rounds and an estimated 1 million shells over 100 millimeter caliber. So that'll probably be 120 millimeter caliber mortar shells. Again, this is half of what they promised. You know, the initiative was for over 1 million, but they provided only about half of that. So the word is that they're going to do it again and carry on themselves to find and source these artillery shells for Ukraine. So that's good, but again, like, let's actually meet the goal we state, bud. That does it for the mobilization. And last thing here for the brief before we get to the articles. Russian occupational authorities continue to violate the Geneva Convention by conscripting civilians in occupied Ukraine to serve in the Russian military. The DPR head Denis Pushilin stated on the 7th that he plans to illegally conscript and train civilians in occupied Donetsk Oblast to work in military registration specialties in the Russian military. The document calls the Russian Volunteer Society for Assistance to these acronyms. The Russian Volunteer Society for Assistance to the Army, Aviation, and Navy of Russia, or DOSAAF, to help train and prepare civilians for these specialties, including through courage lessons with veterans of the wars in Ukraine, Chechnya, and Afghanistan. Imagine bringing in fucking Afghanistan veterans. DOSAAF is a Soviet relic that funds and promotes military service for Russian youth through military patriotic programming and skills, and sends representatives to the military to draft boards to allocate conscripts with specialized skills into specific military roles. And lastly, there was another assassination against the occupation authorities. Ukrainian GUR reported on the 28th that unspecified actors assassinated former deputy head of the Berdyansk City Occupation Administration, Yevgeny Bogdanov, by planting an explosive device in his car. The GUR reported that Bogdanov supervised the occupation's admin's finances and construction of Russian fortifications in the occupied zone. Yeah, there was no video I could find of the car bomb, because typically we see video footage, or at least assessments after that, either published by the FSB or the GUR. Yeah, okay, guys. That does it for the brief itself. Let's get on into the articles here. Let me just bring up the first one here. Yeah, all right, let me close out this. Okay, hold on. Okay, I closed that out. Minimize that window, and let me find my article window. Here we go. Okay, so we got 6 articles here. I'll try to get through them fairly quickly because we're over 2.5 hours now. Typically, most briefs last about an hour and a half, guys, but again, we're covering 2 weeks, and there's been a lot going on. I actually had to dump a lot of the articles I wanted to cover. But ISW published this article here, Lessons of the Minsk Deal, Breaking the Cycle of Russia's War in Ukraine. We'll just go over the executive summary and then wheel down to the conclusion at the bottom of it, though, because we don't have to go over the supporting data, because it gives a timeline of the Minsk 1, Minsk 2 deals, and the consequences of the wars, etc. So, this was published on the 11th by Natalia Bogayova. Anyway. So, executive summary. Some peace deals lead to peace, others to war. War. Minsk 2 deal aimed to end Russia's limited invasion of Ukraine in 2015, but instead laid the groundwork for the full-scale invasion in 2022. The United States must learn from the Minsk deal or risk a direct Russian-NATO conflict that puts American lives at risk. Minsk 2 was a weak deal. It demanded nothing of the invader, Russia. It strengthened the Kremlin's aggressive worldview that had driven the conflict to begin with. It masked Russia's military weakness. It gave the Kremlin time and space to prepare for a larger invasion. The West could have helped Ukraine reach a stronger deal in 2015. This was under Obama, yeah. Um, Obama was, God, he was so fucking weak at so many things. But then he dropped bombs on terrorists and their families. Therefore, you kill one terrorist, but you create another 100 because you killed so many civilians. Anyway, there was a lot of things Obama was incompetent on. Minsk II gave Putin the hope that he could win in Ukraine without war. Russia sought and failed to control Ukraine in 2014 by military means, and Minsk II gave Putin a way to demand that Ukraine, an independent state, give Russia control over its internal policies. Putin failed at that too and turned to the full-scale invasion in 2022. Minsk II helped put Putin, Minsk II helped Putin mask his demands for Ukraine's surrender behind false calls for peace. The West has repeatedly failed to call out and counter the real Russian demands since 2014. It also reinforced Western delusions that Putin might simply settle if he received some land or if the West metered support to Ukraine or tried hard to negotiate with Putin. The deal also gave an excuse to those who understood the Putin and his goals, but sought to restore ties with Russia anyway. This was also with Germany's bringing on, because this was under Merkel too, if I remember right. She was really cozy with Russia, and the old German Russian alignment. It's not also because of the occupation of East Germany, but the geopolitical thinking, at least in German circles, from my understanding, is that to bring Russia closer to Europe and to avoid war and to alleviate Chinese influence, is that Germany would become dependent on Russian energy to energize and power German industry, therefore bringing the two economies closer and having some sort of European influence in Russia by doing that. That was at least the public statement of that sort of alignment for the economies. But we've seen the consequences of that because Russia has leveraged that energy against Germany. And this is just my conspiracy theory working out here because Russia finances both, quote, far right, AfD is hardly far right because their spokesman's married to a fucking Sri Lankan, but also the German far left with the Linke and the Green Party. So with the Green Party having its influence in the last coalition up to last week, they requested the shutdown of all German nuclear power. They had 6 reactors and now they're all dormant. I don't know if they've been deconstructed because I don't think you could really do that quickly. But at the same time, by shutting down the nuclear reactors, energy prices obviously went up because nuclear is very cheap, and they had to leverage green energy. I'm using air quotes there again, and have Russian natural gas and other sources from Russia to power their economy. That left them entirely vulnerable, and this is partially why their economy is in such dire straits right now. It's not only because of their dependence on Russia, which Russia wanted to leverage against Germany, but also because of the Green Party, which I would argue has some influence from Russia in Germany. This is again the whole way domestic politics affects your foreign policy. If you don't have the energy to power your own industry through your nuclear reactors, and you have a Green Party that's saying let's shut down the reactors and become more dependent on Russian oil, then you're going to have this sort of vulnerability. And the consequences of that is now that the German economy is in dire straits because of bullshit worldviews. Anyway, I'm getting off the side. I'm getting off the rails here, but you get what I'm saying. So back to Minsk II here. Another weak deal would validate Putin's 2022 full-scale invasion and give Putin hope to gain even more over time. Hope for Putin means more war. More war means a larger war, and an absolved Russia that bears little to no cost for its invasion will want more and will rebuild its capability to do more. A larger war would mean a higher cost for the United States, risk American lives, and risk a catastrophic escalation. The Trump administration has an historic opportunity to break Russia's cycle of overt war and war through peace in Ukraine. To do so, the United States must learn lessons from the Minsk deal. 1. Russia will seek to transfer the responsibility and cost for its war onto someone else's balance sheet, mainly Europe. Putin's demands are stand-ins for his goals. Controlling Ukraine and making the United States bend to Putin's demands to create a world order that favors Russia, which is obviously happening right in front of us, and Putin will fight as long as he believes he can outlast the West in Ukraine. Ending the war requires stripping Putin of hope that he can destroy Ukraine as a state in his lifetime, militarily or through a peace deal. And 4, Russia can accept failure. So let's go down to the summary here. Again, it goes through the goals, the mixed two flaws, and a lot of the other stuff here. It is worth reading, but I don't want to bore you guys here. So let's get to, okay, Russia can accept failure. Where's it at? Putin is not invulnerable. The war is not lost despite Russia's increased but nonetheless modest gains in eastern Ukraine. Russia has Russia has well-discussed advantages. Putin is accumulating risks and costs, however. Russia is facing growing cost of material and manpower, issues with Russia fourth generation system and economic issues such as inflation, labor shortage, and erosion of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, which has about a year left. And well, along with some caveats on that, though, because they use the sovereign wealth fund for investments into other state corporations, and those are tied up. They can pull those out, but at the same time, they'd be divesting from their own economy just to have that liquidity in the wealth fund. So the depth of that wealth fund is a little bit shallower than most people think. I mean, you'd have to divest in your own economy to get that money and then spend it somewhere else. Kind of like, oh, yeah, anyway, you'd be cutting your own throat that way, basically. Anyway, I was trying to think of a metaphor, but I can't think of it at the moment. Okay, yeah. So labor shortage and erosion of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, and increasingly costly trade-offs between funneling a limited supply of Russians to the front lines or to buttress the economy. Russia depends on partners to sustain its war. Shifting U.S. policies on China and Iran are putting Russia's enabling partnerships at risk. Putin's accumulating problems will not matter if the Trump administration gives Russia time and space to regroup, as Biden administration's policies of incrementalism have allowed Putin in the past. As means to help conceal Russia's failures in 2015, a premature deal risks letting Putin off the hook before he faces hard choices and maturing problems, and before Ukraine and the United States can attain a true position of strength. Bills will come due for the Kremlin if Russia were to face maximum pressure from the United States and its partners. For the first time since Putin invaded in 2022, the United States has many underutilized ways to increase pressure on Russia. Hitting Russia's energy sector harder is one example. Exerting pressure on the Kremlin across theaters and domains, time and space is another opportunity. The true driver of Russia's economic losses in Russia are sustained battlefield losses, however. The United States cannot achieve maximum pressure against Russia without U.S. military support for Ukraine. The United States and its partners must force the Kremlin to face compounding pressures in Ukraine and globally without easy ways to offset them. So that is their assessment. Yeah, so how Trump set the negotiation wheel in motion and what he demands from Ukraine. This is the weird thing with this whole thing. He's demanding things from Ukraine without really demanding too much in concessions from Russia. Some people are apologizing for him and sweeping up after him, saying, "Well, he'll get to Russia in a minute." That's not how you typically start negotiations, though. You don't leverage your support for your own ally coercively like he's been doing. We'll get to the mineral deal here in a minute. I do have some notes on that. Weeks of behind the scenes. So this is from European Pravda. Weeks of behind the scenes efforts of Donald Trump's administration on the Russia track has yielded the first public results. For European capitals, these results have felt like a cold shower, if not an outright bombshell. Trump has broken an unwritten taboo of U.S. foreign policy over the past 3 years. He held a conversation with Putin, shattering the once unchallenged principle of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, which I think was the right path. But anyway, Trump has introduced a new reality in which Ukraine is rapidly losing its agency. I don't really agree with that, but that's beside the point. He presented Zelensky with a fait accompli. The negotiation process had already begun, and Ukraine did not enter it from, quote, a position of strength. Read more to understand the contours of the peace plan in their old article. The first official U.S.-Russia contact since September 2021 was preceded by a prisoner exchange. American schoolteacher Mark Fogel was swapped for businessman and cyber criminal Alexander Venek. As I understand it, this guy's done some really bad things, and we got a schoolteacher in the exchange. It's another one of these things where Russia got the benefit in the trade. This exchange seemingly convinced Trump of the effectiveness of his Middle East envoy, Stephen Witkoff. who had quietly tasked with establishing contacts with the Russians a few weeks earlier. Trump's February 12 call with Putin was not entirely unexpected. After all, Trump had repeatedly stated his desire to speak with Putin as soon as possible. He had also expressed his intentions not to just talk, but also to meet with Putin in Saudi Arabia. But what was the U.S. aiming to achieve with this move? Based on public statements, Trump's primary goal was to demonstrate that, unlike Biden, he was willing to talk to Putin about ending the war in Ukraine, and crucially, that Putin is also willing to talk to him. Key issue, however, was the negotiations were to be conducted on U.S. terms, with Russia expected to make concessions. Notably, Trump's statement about his conversation with Putin made no mention of any red lines for ending the war, another clear departure from Democratic policy. Moreover, his post hinted that the U.S. is open to restoring normal relations with Russia, that we're seeing with Rubio and I forgot his name. They're Minister of Foreign Affairs in Russia. Uh, anyway, uh, when it comes to Ukraine, however, the new Pentagon chief Pete Hegseth made America's stance clear during his first visit to Brussels for a Ramstein meeting. Ukraine's goals to returning to its pre-2014 borders and joining NATO are unrealistic. However, he did not rule out future NATO membership entirely. This is kind of the weird caveat to all this. A lot of liberal media is kind of clinching onto this. I don't know if it's justified or not, but it is what they're doing. They're saying the 2014 borders, but not the 2022 borders, right? So the full Ukraine borders would include Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, right? But the 2022 borders would be obviously with the DNR, the LPR, and Crimea under Russian rule by extension. Um, that would be an interesting off ramp because at least Putin would be able to. I almost said Trump there. Putin would be able to say he helped save Russian speakers in Ukraine if some sort of concession was made in that offer to Russia by saying, well, these people are Russian speakers, they want to go to Russia, I saved them, I can now end the war, that sort of thing. At the same time, to Ukraine's chagrin, that would mean conceding some of their own territory. I don't know. At the same time, like that can happen, but without Ukraine formally acknowledging that as legitimate, it could just be an armistice sort of condition. I don't know, but that's something that is kind of being gleaned from some of the details in these negotiations. Instead, Hegseth stated that negotiated settlement in Ukraine must be backed by by capable European and non-European forces, but strictly not American troops. These forces would be deployed as part of a mission outside NATO's framework, except from Article 5 protections, and subject to strong international oversight along the front line. Um, there's so many things in this, though. It's a decent summary, but there's so many things they're going over that require so much more depth. Like the non-European forces involved, the framework for those to be deployed, what their ROE would be, and what sort of oversight mechanisms you would have along the front line. There's so many moving parts in all this, though. It's actually very fascinating from an international relations point of view, but that's some of the topics they do have to work out. Donald Trump has deliberately set the peace process in motion regarding Ukraine, even though his administration's final vision from the process remains unclear. I don't think he has a clear vision. And something confirmed by multiple official statements and sources within Washington familiar with the discussions. However, in the past 24 hours, balance has shifted significantly against Ukrainian interests. Anyway, military. See here. Military equipment and the right to fight on. Trump on what U.S. minerals deal gives Ukraine. So this was today when I was doing my prep. So obviously this was. So today's the 25th. This was published by Kyiv Independent in the middle of the night over in Ukraine. So there is a time difference in this. It's a short read. But yeah, I'll read this here and give you some more notes I found from another source. An agreement between Kyiv and Washington regarding Ukraine's critical minerals and natural resources will grant Ukraine, quote, military equipment and the right to fight on. Like, anyway, I fucking hate the way Trump says things. Anyway, Trump said on the 25th. Zelensky's office confirmed on the 25th that the U.S. and Ukraine had reached an agreement regarding Ukraine's critical minerals after an intense period of negotiations. Speaking to reporters at the Oval Office, from the Oval Office of the White House, Trump said that the agreement gave Ukraine billions of dollars in aid and lots of equipment. It was unclear if he was referring to future or past military aid packages from the United States. The deal gives Ukraine, quote, military equipment and the right to fight on, and originally the right to fight. Anyway, the way Trump says things just sounds like you're talking to a 5-year-old sometimes. Trump also said that Zelensky would visit the White House on February 28th in 3 days to sign the deal. The finalized agreement, dated February 24, reportedly offers Kyiv no security guarantees in exchange for 50% of the revenues from the future monetization of Ukraine's state-owned mineral resources. So that's the caveat there, right? Because the original draft was over the whole of Ukraine's minerals and rare earths. The problem with that is that it would break the private property laws in Ukraine's constitution. Now, with this little wording here, they're saying over, let me go over it again, Ukraine's state-owned mineral resources. You get what I'm saying? So those are publicly owned mineral resources, not privately owned. Now, again, like those privately owned are owned by the oligarchs, so that's a whole different ball of wax. But Ukraine's state-owned mineral resources are gonna be part of that exchange. So I don't know what that size of that total pool is of their own resources that are owned by the state, but state-owned, 50% of those revenues is going to future monetization. I have a bit more information what that means in my notes. I'll get to that after this article here. White House has said that the agreement is necessary in order for the U.S. to, quote, recoup the funds it has granted to Ukraine in aid packages over the past 3 years of Russia's full-scale war. I'll get to that. I mean, there's so much to mean. Anyway, there's a lot that is a knock-on effect with that. I'll get to that in a minute. Quote, Ukraine, I will say they're very brave. They're very good soldiers. But without the United States and its money and its military equipment, this war would have been over in a very short time, said Trump. Yeah, okay. Trump has also said he was open to striking a deal on critical minerals with Russia. I like to buy minerals on Russian land too, if we can, he said. The rare earth, they have very good rare earth. It's great for Russia too, because we could do deals there. They have very valuable land that isn't utilized, so something like that could take place, unquote. Trump denied having spoken to Putin regarding U.S. access to critical minerals in to Russian-occupied Ukrainian lands and the minerals therein. Yeah, I think that's a lie. But anyway, Putin on February 24th, third anniversary of the war, said that Moscow was open to working with foreign partners on developing rare earth mineral deposits, including in occupied regions of Ukraine. So that kind of goes against what Trump said there. Okay, so a couple things here, guys. Let me talk about this part right here first, though, where the White House is saying, well, we need our money back. Now, most Americans have a legitimate grievance against the state about not getting enough money. You know, especially after Hurricane Helene, collapsing bridges in Florida. You know, and then we had the I think it was a Sri Lankan crew that hit that bridge in Baltimore. You know, like the infrastructure's falling apart. Like we can all acknowledge that. Like we want a better country. We want a lot more of our own money going back to us. That's right. That is just. At the same time, however, the White House. Okay, so again, that's the grievance. The way it's being done and the logic it's being done for, it's fallacious and how to put it, self-defeating. I'll explain why. So the Americans want their friends to pay them back for all the defense assistance and everything else they've given them, right? Okay. So Ukraine's been a very short-term partner for the most part. Longer-term partners like Japan, Germany, South Korea, France, England, take your pick, you know? Like, let's take South Korea as an example, right? Like, we've been there since 1951, you know, and then the DMZ was created in 1953. So you're looking at 70 plus years of occupation with at least 20,000 soldiers there. I mean, that tallies into the billions of dollars annually. And what this precedent is setting is a very dangerous one, and it's really weakening the American position around the world, right? So much of the American economy is set on the condition of trust in the assurances that the U.S. Navy provides for the transit of goods across the world, globalization, and also the trust that America will be there for the defense of others. It's kind of the way the system works. I'm only saying this because it has to be reiterated. But the way Trump's doing it by leveraging and coercing Ukraine for assistance given, that's setting like South Korea's like, ooh, hold the fuck up. You guys have been here way longer, and you like Ukraine doesn't even have any American troops there. But now you're saying that you want money from them. What does that mean for us or Germany or Japan? Um, that how to put it? If Russia is trying to isolate China, this is the wrong way to do it. Because if you're going to isolate China, you need friends. And if you want to be the big economic powerhouse in the world, you need people to trust you in your way of doing things. Um, Again, I think that's a lot of people say that is how you bring about change domestically. That's like an accelerationist argument. At the same time, you don't. Like, the biggest issue is having families. Like the fertility rates in every Western country is dog shit, and people need to have kids. And you don't go about fixing that problem by making life more expensive. Simple as. If you collapse the economy, 'cause that's what's going to happen if these things go to their full extent. It's going to be way harder for people to make families and have a sustaining life or have a sustainable form of living if you're having to worry about how much food costs and everything else, right? So in this sense, Trump is a true destabilizer. It's true, but at the same time, he's not really assuring a stable future for his voting base. Even anyway, it's by eroding that trust, it is going to make things harder at home. There's just no way around it, I think. But okay, so that's a small part of this whole thing and why trust in the United States is pretty much important for even people domestically, I think. Um, don't get me wrong, I don't speak as globalization is a good thing. I think there's a lot of evils involved. There's a smart way of decoupling from globalization, and then there's the dumb way of doing it. And Trump's doing it the dumb way by making people not trust us, by leveraging and coercing people to do quick, expedient things that are good in the moment and not long-term planning. I'll give you an example. Um, the Marshall Plan, right, or even the success with Poland and Romania with the EU. You could take the route Trump is doing with Ukraine, or some could argue with Belgium and the Congo. You could see it as a deposit of resources beneath the dirt and extract the wealth of the country and um, take all those resources home and use it and leave the country in poverty. That's good in the short term, possibly, but in the long term, it's dog shit, I would argue, because we've seen some of that work in some other countries and it's created distrust and a strong anti-colonial movement. I don't want to use leftist language, but that's what we've been seeing in Sahel. And with what we've seen in Poland, in Germany, and Japan, and Romania, when you put forward these reconstruction policies and you invest in the long term, you build up a greater return over the long term. Now, what Trump's wanting to do is bring in those rare earths and resources for the semiconductor industry, so we have a better military and more advanced technology against China. That's supposedly the logic. But over the long term, what we see with the Marshall Plan and all these other reconstruction plans for Romania and Poland in the EU are strong friends with greater economies that have a greater value of exchange also for the investment we give them in the long term. Dealing with an economy that is just a pure extraction economy like Russia versus a economy like Poland and Romania to an extent. They could work on advanced technologies and medium scale industry and stuff like these. These are added value industries and the service industry in these countries that adds more also in our exchange with them. That's the economic point of view on that, I think. And both countries have benefited greatly, economically speaking, from being in the EU and the Schengen zone. Socially, however, it's been terrible. Again, that's the caveat to any of this, is that a lot of these social programs that the West has been trying to install into these countries has compounded the fertility problem, increased the divorce rates and abortions and all the evils we have to live through. But at the same time, it also has to be acknowledged that the material benefits are somewhat good, but it does not offset the social costs, obviously. Um, anyway, there's a whole. Anyway, you get what I'm saying, though. I'll leave it at that, though. Okay, a couple more articles here, guys, before we close it out. This was just an interesting, how to put it, a an anomaly I found here. Leader of the UK right-wing populist unexpectedly supports Ukraine joining NATO, and it's Nigel Farage of all people. Yeah, I was surprised when I read this too. The leader of the British right-wing populist party Reform UK has unexpectedly expressed support for Ukraine's ascension into NATO. Farage, whose right-wing populist party has topped British opinion polls recently, believes Ukraine's rapprochement with the West should be part of a long-term solution. Farage made the comments in London on Wednesday. This is dated on the 13th of February, as Trump decided to begin direct communication with the Kremlin. Farage, one of Trump's closest associates in Europe, told the press conference that he did not want to, quote, prejudge how negotiations will go. Quote from Farage. If we can get Putin into a place and Zelensky into a place where they can have reasonable negotiation, I would have thought, looking ahead, it's probably essential that Ukraine joins NATO. Details. Later that evening, Farage reiterated his view on GB News, where he is a presenter, emphasizing Ukraine now joining NATO is almost an essential part of this peace deal. During last year's election campaign, Reform UK leader just criticized NATO's eastward expansion. Again, right-wing populists. At the same time, you have people that are speaking out of their own mind. Anyway, so that's just interesting. Farage is for Ukraine joining NATO. So yeah, just interesting. Berlin, yeah, so this is just a short article here. Germany's new chancellor, Merz, says they'll give Ukraine Taurus missiles. Details. Quote from him, my personal position and the position of my parliamentary group has always been clear, he said, emphasizing that he was ready to supply more than just missiles. My personal view and my willing is still and remains to deliver, that's a weird way of wording it, within the European coordinated framework of delivering more weapons to Ukraine. However, he emphasized that negotiations among donors to the Ukrainian armed forces would take place before any deliveries began. Notably, he excluded the United States from these discussions. That's probably a smart move. We should be willing to deliver, but only if we have an agreement with our European partners. And there are at least two others who are delivering cruise missiles, which is the UK and France. Again, this is the problem with the EU, man. It's like instead of acting, it's just a, they have to have a meeting to get to a committee to send back to their governments, and then the government comes back with a draft proposal that they have to bring back to the meeting, and then they have another committee. It's circle jerk democracy, man, and it's just fuck. It's part of the reason why Europe has gone the way it has. It cannot act decisively. People will argue that that's built into the system, which it is, because that's what democracies do. It purposefully builds slowness to the system, right? It's not meant to be effective, essentially. But at the same time, like in the middle of a war, you need to act quickly and decisively, and EU's anything but that. Okay, last article, guys, before we close out. We're just over 3 hours. Trump's special envoy to Ukraine explains the division of roles in U.S. negotiations to end the war. So this was interesting because with Witkoff becoming Trump's like favored special envoy, I did a little. Oh, sorry, I meant to also talk about something here. Also, I'm sorry. We talked about the mineral deal. Sorry, I skipped over that. Let me talk on that about Trump really quickly here. So this was about. Let me see here. So this is from the Kyiv Independent, which is also this. There was another article on this though. I pulled from there. I wrote down the notes here. So Ukraine agreed on the mineral deal with U.S. after Washington drops their toughest demands. This is from the Financial Times. So it's the Kyiv Independent quoting from the Financial Times. Sorry. Publication writes that the U.S. has abandoned its demands for 500 billion in potential income from Ukraine's resources. What is in the agreement? So this is what we know so far. So, creation of a fund to which Ukraine will contribute 50% of the income of future monetization, again, of state mineral resources. That's the caveat. It's not all resources. State mineral resources, including gas and oil, as well as related logistics, probably the rail, I would imagine. The fund will invest in projects in Ukraine. So that's the important part right here. So the creation of the fund, 50% of their income will go to use those resources, including oil and gas, to invest in projects in Ukraine. So that's that circular feedback mechanism. It's not being extracted from Ukraine. It's going into projects into Ukraine. So that's important. The agreement makes no reference to U.S. security guarantees, unfortunately, which Kyiv initially insisted on exchange for agreeing to the deal. The agreement does not specify the size of the U.S. share in the fund or the terms of the joint ownership transactions, which are best to be settled in subsequent agreements. According to Ukrainsky Pravda, the agreement also states Ukraine or the United States will not have the right to sell or transfer their share in the fund without the prior written consent of the other party. Sources of contributions to the fund will not include those already part of Ukraine's budget reviews. The timing, volume, and stability of contributions will be agreed upon in future agreement of the fund. So this is just again draft agreement. The fund, at its discretion, may credit or return to the government of Ukraine actual expenses incurred on new projects, and contributions made to it will be reinvested at least once a year into Ukraine economy with the aim of quote promoting security and prosperity. So interesting. It's not a pure extraction. It's going back into Ukraine, and my guess is that this is going to be a money-making mechanism for some partners that have a share in this fund. That'll be interesting to see who's actually the shareholders in that fund. So anyway, that's the deal, and it's not as bad as we thought, but it also isn't really anything huge. It's a modest gain for Ukraine, I guess, with the U.S. trying to invest in that fund. But yeah, that's we'll see where that goes. Yeah, so let's get back to the last article here, guys. Trump has assigned roles to officials in charge of preparing peace talks in the Russo-Ukrainian war. General Keith Kellogg at the Ukrainian lunch organized by Viktor Penchuk Foundation at the Munich Security Conference, as reported by European Pravda. Kellogg stated that he's involved in the process despite rumors of his removal spreading after a recent conversation with Trump and Putin. After his conversation with Putin, Trump announced a negotiating team that included his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, but did not mention Kellogg. So that's what people are reading between the lines. Kellogg clarified that he is not involved in the Russian issue. The general explained that Witkoff works more on the U.S.-Russian line, while he works on the U.S.-Ukrainian-European line. Again, we're seeing where Trump's leaning into, so that's why Witkoff's so much more important. However, General Kellogg stressed that he would not make any decisions as his task was to lay the groundwork for Trump's decisions. Quote, one of the reasons I'm here is to reach out to allies and we say, quote, what do you think? And then I bring it back to the person that makes the decision. Keith Kellogg does not make the decisions. It's the President of the United States. I will never move into the territory of decision making, he explained. Kellogg also stated that he believes that Trump work is effective, adding that he has done more in the last 30 days to end the war than the previous administration in 3 years. Yeah, okay. Notably in this speech, the general did not mention Ukraine's victory or superiority, instead focusing on the end of the war. So that is it for that, guys. And that is the show. A little over 3 hours. We had a lot of ground to cover, and I appreciate all of you guys hanging in there. But yeah, so let me think here. So if you guys want to donate, please donate at buymeacoffee.com/wcast. If you want to join the chat, that's at t.me/rated ruin chat, and the channel for any posts that I have from my mind or anything I want to share is on Telegram also at t.me/the Warcast. Also on Telegram at the Warcast. And you can see any of these shows on Rumble or Odyssey. And we'll try to keep this up on YouTube, but we'll see how censored it gets. What else? I'm trying to think. I think I covered all my bases. And some parting thoughts. Just go out and do something good again, guys. I always say this every show, but I always say go and do something good every week. The world's in a bad spot, and Ukraine could use some help. And hopefully, some of you guys went out to the rallies over the last weekend and made some good contacts and networked a little bit, because I'm sure it was a good time for a lot of people. Anyone in Ukraine, Godspeed and good hunting. Hopefully your victory comes soon. And everyone else, God bless, and I will see you next week. All right, and we'll be back next week with a longer show, with a lot of combat footage, the best of last year. We'll probably not do another brief next week. I know it seems like I'm switching between shows here. But it's such a long show, typically I just include my show notes in it amidst the combat footage. So it will be a very long show, and we'll go over the best combat footage we've had of last year, along with some interesting stories from Azov, politics, and anything else that kind of just was interesting last year. All right. So have a good week, guys, and I will see you next week.
The world is violent, and nobody cares. The only person that is going to save you is going to be yourself.